will be streaming on YouTube. Just a few virtual etiquette things. Please mute yourself until you're ready to speak and then unmute. In just a few minutes, I'm going to do a roll call just to see which members are present. When we vote on items, there is one item on your agenda today that requires a vote, which is for your chair. We'll be doing a roll call vote. So that means that after a motion is made and seconded, I'll actually go through each person's name to capture the vote, and you'll say yay or nay. That's mostly for record-keeping purposes because we're in a digital space. Also, because we're in that digital space, before you ask a question or speak, if you could just state your name just so everyone knows who's speaking. In terms of the minutes, if you submitted edits for the minutes, those have already been made and should be reflected in the link. I think that's all before I turn it over. I'll do the roll call just to make sure we have a quorum. Margot Howard. Cameo Lanning. So when I call your name, if you could just unmute real quick and say here.
Here.
Perfect. Thank you, Cameo. Connie Harlan. Melissa Lee.
Here.
Perfect. Thank you. Alicia Leva. Dr. Rodney Jackson.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning, gotcha. Rhea Jacobs.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning, perfect. Angela Richardson. Angela, I think that's you. I'm going to take that as your yay. Frank Cooper.
Gotcha.
Here.
Yep, he's our first one here. Welcome, Mr. Frank. Will Paul.
Good morning, I'm here.
You were a little gargly there, Will. I got you. Okay. Dr. Lowry.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning. Miss Dorothy Crow Yates.
I'm here. I had to join by phone. My computer wouldn't do the audio.
Gotcha. Representative Jim Davis. And Representative Charles Graham. All right. Madam Chair, you have a quorum. I'll turn it over to you.
Dr. Silver,
Yes.
this is Olivia. I don't know if you can.
We got you, Dr. Oxendine. Perfect. Thank you.
On the phone.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Oxendine. And Mr. Gregg, I know you're on there too. All right, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Lachlan.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. Happy Friday. This meeting is called to order. Welcome to our September virtual SACIE meeting. It's great to be back with everyone with a shared vision of providing educational experiences and cultural opportunities to American Indian students in North Carolina. With that being said, we welcome our newest members. Welcome indeed. So we will proceed with our oath of office. So I think today Mr. Frank Cooper and Mr. Rodney Jackson are doing the oath of office.
As well as Melissa Lee.
Melissa Lee.
And
thank you. I'm sorry, Miss Melissa. So today we have our newest members, Mr. Rodney Jackson, Mr. Frank Cooper, and Miss Melissa Lee.
Dr. Breeze, could you pull up the oath of office?
All right, we'll begin with Mr. Frank Cooper. Or can we just do all three of them at the same time, Miss Dr. Silva, or should we do them independently?
I think altogether it'd be fun.
Okay. All right. So and then if each one of you will state your name.
I, Rodney Jackson.
I, Melissa Lee.
Mr. Frank Cooper. Mr. Frank. And I'm just going to let you guys read that at your leisure and then sign that and submit that back to Dr. Susan Silver. Certainly welcome to our SACIE board. We appreciate your dedication and commitment to American Indians in North Carolina. All right, congratulations. All right, next on the agenda is the approval of our agenda and minutes. Do we have a motion and second to approve the minutes from the last meeting?
This is Will Paul. I'll make a motion.
Angela Richardson, second the motion.
So moved.
We gotta do a roll call.
Oh, sorry.
All right, all those in favor of the motion that was made by Mr. Will Paul and seconded by Ms. Angela Richardson to accept the minutes of the previous year, Cameo Lanning. Okay, I'll circle back around this Cameo. Melissa Lee? If I could get everybody to just unmute themselves for a minute while I run through the roll call, and then you can unmute again. Okay, so I'll go through. Ms. Dorothy, approve the minutes. Yay, nay?
Yay. I
Thank you.
approve.
Thank you. Ms. Cameo? Dr. Lowry?
Yes.
Dr. Jackson?
Yes.
Perfect. Melissa Lee?
Yes.
Cameo?
Yay.
Thank you. Thank you, I got you.
Okay.
All right, did I miss anyone? And Dr. Locklear?
Yes.
All right, that's approved.
All right, so moved. All right, I hope everyone's had an opportunity to look over the agenda. Do we have a motion and second to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda, Dorothy Yates.
LaRonda Lowry, second.
Perfect. The motion has been made and seconded. Cameo?
Yay.
Thank you. Melissa Lee?
Yay.
Thank you. Dr. Jackson?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Angela?
Yes.
Mr. Frank?
Yes.
Thank you. Will Paul?
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Lowry?
Yes.
Thank you. And Ms. Dorsey?
Yes.
Thank you. And Dr. Locklear?
Yes.
It's approved, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. All right, next on our agenda is our very own State of Education Board member for Sand Hills Education Region, Dr. Olivia Otsenine. Thank you for joining us once again, Dr. Otsenine, to provide State Board of Education updates.
Thank you very much, Chair Lady Locklear, and it is an honor and always an honor and privilege to join the SACIE group. Maybe someday we will be for real face-to-face in the State Board meeting room on 7th floor, but the State Board members haven't been 100% collected in that room for quite a while. So I do look forward to that happening in the very near future. I trust that all of you are doing well physically and your families are well, and you continue to adjust and make those adjustments as we have to do day to day until this thing called a pandemic. We can call it post-pandemic. I am only going to highlight one major thing that is going on in the State Board of Education. We are still looking at the CARE money that has come to North Carolina from Washington and on to the General Assembly and then over to the Department of Public Instruction, and we take action on policies and how that money is going to be allotted and then sent on out to the school system. I'm happy to say that the General Assembly rainy day fund that has been growing for the last, I would say, 10 years has made it possible to give our public schools about $115 million, and that's just one funding stream that is going to our school districts, the 115 school districts, and also our charter schools. So we continue to enjoy pipelines of money coming from Washington and on to North Carolina. And I'm sure once those dollars are in the hands of your local boards of education and your school finance professionals and your superintendent, that money is distributed on out to schools and on to students. That's the whole purpose of it, is to continue the sound education of our students in North Carolina. The State Board of Education is getting ready to, not this month, but the upcoming month, November, the following month, I should say, November, we will be looking at our principal standards. The State Board of Education is responsible for all the licensing of teachers and principals and any employee that interfaces with students. The State Board of Education in general is responsible for licensing those categories. So that includes our principals in our school systems. So we are going to begin in November being brought up to date on the new standards for evaluating principals, and those evaluations are done by the superintendents and his or her staff. And also those standards will be not really modified, but somewhat adjusted for use in our teacher education programs, our educator preparation programs. For instance, UNCP, we have about a 35-year-old MSA program, Master in School Administration. It is one of the two flagship programs in the Sand Hills region, the Pembroke program, and also the Fayetteville State program. As far as our state schools are concerned, we do have our private, Campbell University also has an MSA program. So those standards will be modified so that we at the EPP level can do our best job possible preparing our future principals. So that's going to be a pretty protracted process. The first go look at the standards will be next month. the State Board of Education will get about an hour, hour and a half presentation on the proposed new standards, and then on to continuing to work on the standards and revise them with our professional educator preparation standards commission. It's called PEPSI, and Dr. Connie Locklear currently serves on PEPSI. So they have a lot to do with educator standards, and then we will pilot those standards. We'll have some school systems and some EPP, schools of education. We'll probably do a one-year pilot on the standards, make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing in terms of producing the best principals possible in North Carolina. And then after the pilot, we'll be moving on into the home stretch of developing policies and adopting those standards. So that's big work ahead of us. It takes sometimes up to 3-5 years to redo standards because of all the validation that has to take place. It's near and dear to me because at Pembroke I teach future principals. So I'm very interested in that work that is about to come about. And that's my report, Dr. Silver and Dr. Locklear, and I'll be more than glad to entertain questions if members have questions.
Thank you, Dr. Otsenine, for those most informative updates and your continued work on the State Board of Education. Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Otsenine?
Thank you.
Thank you. If everyone would, I apologize, moving on in the agenda, we did not do the selection of the SACIE chair, so I wanted to circle back around to that, Dr. Silver.
Yes, ma'am.
So we're adding the selection of the SACIE chair here?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
And even though you're the interim, I think you could still run that motion.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure, thank you. So, do we have a nomination for SACIE chair?
This is Dorothy Yates. I'd like to nominate Dr. Tiffany Locklear as the SACIE chair.
This is Angela Richardson. I'd like to second that motion.
Before I run the roll call, just leave the floor open for a few minutes to see if there are any other nominees. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to run the motion. It's been motioned and seconded for Dr. Tiffany Locklear to serve as permanent chair of SACIE. I'm going to do the roll call vote now. It was motioned by Ms. Dorothy Crow Yates and seconded by Ms. Angela Richardson. Please unmute so you can give your reply, and then you can mute yourself back. I'll give everybody just a second to do that. Great. I'll start. Cameo?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Melissa?
Yes.
Dr. Jackson?
Yes.
Ms. Rita Jacobs?
I'm here.
Is that a yay? Perfect. Perfect. Angela, you made the motion, so we have yours recorded. Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
Perfect. Mr. Will Paul? Mr. Will?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. I had to step away. I had a phone call.
You're fine. Perfect. Dr. Lowry?
Yes.
And Ms. Dorothy, you made the motion, so we've got your vote.
Yes.
Motion carries. Dr. Lockley, congratulations.
Thank you, everyone. I look forward to working alongside each of you. All right, moving forward in the agenda, joining us is no stranger to SACIE, Mr. Greg Richardson, the Executive Director of the NC Commission of Indian Affairs, with updates from his department. Welcome, Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, and good morning to you, and congratulations on your selection as chair of the North Carolina SACIE group here in North Carolina. It's a very important and very distinguished position. You all probably already know this, but North Carolina sets the stage in the nation in terms of Indian education. And through SACIE, we've had an outstanding track record and years of service in terms of being on the cutting edge of Indian education with the production of your annual reports and those kind of things. So I wanted to just do a shout out for all of you and to also congratulate the new members today, Rodney Jackson, Melissa Lee, and I thought I heard Frank Cooper's name. I'm not sure, but
Yes, sir.
Frank, it's always good to see you out there on the cutting edge of Indian issues and being a tribal council member. I think SACIE now, from my notations here, I believe, and I might be wrong, but there are 3 tribal leaders sitting on the SACIE. You have Ms. Dorothy Crow's chair of the Saponi. You have Frank Cooper, who is on the Lumbee Tribal Council, and also Angela Richardson, who is on the Halawasa Pony Tribal Council. And if I overlooked others who are serving in those tribal government capacities, I do apologize. It is early and it is a rainy morning, but we're here. So pleased to be a part of this discussion and to provide you with some updates on the things that we're confronted with and dealing with at the Commission of Indian Affairs. We've had as you have, and I think gearing up for this meeting is evidence of what we're all dealing with COVID-19 and the pandemic. We've had to adjust all of our operations with the commission as far as our work schedules. We're teleworking right now, and we're under the governor's executive order. We'll be continuing to telework until that executive order is lifted and we're back in place. However, we've learned quite quickly how to continue our work and continue our services just like SACIE has. We're continuing our workforce development program operations. This is where we provide training and other opportunities for job placements for our students here in North Carolina. We have been continuing to provide the rental assistance under our Section 8 housing program to over 800 families who are in need of rental assistance. We're continuing to address domestic violence issues. This is our newest program, and we're also continuing to monitor Indian child welfare and state recognition issues in our state. We've seen, though, that the COVID-19 has had an impact in terms of our ability to get out into the communities. We're starting to use more formats such as you're using today with Zoom and Teams meetings to continue our work. Our commission is meeting by teams in the same platform, rather tedious under the new general statute that you all just opened up your meeting under. Of course, we have to operate a little differently, and we have a large commission, over 25 members. So when we have to take an action or a vote, we have to have a roll call for 25 people. So we've consulted with the governor's office and others here. So we're bundling all of our action items as we move through our agenda, so that at the end of the meeting, we have a roll call that addresses all of the action items that the commission seeks to vote on during our meeting. So we've had to adjust. So with that legislation, it's really caused a change in the way we're doing things. But, you know, in a way, COVID is uncovering some new opportunities for us in many different ways. It's a sad scenario, sad situation we're having to deal with in our country with a pandemic. But we're learning and we're continuing to provide services, continue to stay afloat, and we will continue to do that. The negative impact, of course, with COVID-19 has been tremendous on our tribal and our advocacy side, because this year so far, we've not been able to participate in any of our tribal powwows. The Indian Heritage Month celebration that's coming up in November, of course, will have to be converted to a virtual type of an event. The Indian Heritage Month celebration will be November the 21st and 22nd in a total virtual format. The Museum of History is currently videotaping segments that will be aired during the Indian Heritage Month celebration here in Raleigh. Finally, on one other item I wanted to mention with the heritage part is that we've lost tremendously in terms of our tribal economy since we've not been able to have the powwows and other cultural events. My own tribe, Hallowasaponi, Lumbee, Gohary, Waccamaw, Siouan was supposed to be coming up in October. We've all lost that revenue that tribes would have had in terms of general fund types of activities. So that's going to carry a tremendous impact on our tribal operations on into 2021. In addition to that, budget-wise, we know that COVID-19 has had an impact on all budgets. The state budget, of course, is not immune to that. I know that the General Assembly, when they come back to town in January and February, is just going to have an awesome responsibility in terms of budgeting and those kind of things. Due to the lack of travel, people traveling, gas taxes coming in, many things have impacted the revenue stream in the state of North Carolina. So I'm really not looking forward to what will be coming before us in 2021. So we've already been put on notice. We've received instructions that we cannot fill vacancies without specific approval from the Secretary's office, our travel, and all purchases, unless they are COVID-19 related. We are now in a position where we cannot expend any funds for purchases. We cannot travel and we cannot fill positions. However, like in any situation, there are work-throughs, workarounds when the need arises. And fortunately for us, we've been able to get justifications through on a number of purchases, COVID-19 purchases for PPP and other equipment that we need in the office here in order to sustain our operations. In addition to that, we received a large donation from the Veterans Administration. We were able, through that donation, to send out to each tribe and each veteran organization in the state 1,200 masks to each of our tribes and organizations here in the state. So we're quite pleased that we were able to do that. We were working on the 2020 census all throughout the year so far. And as you know, next week is the end date for the 2020 census. I would encourage all SACIE members to push for the rest of this month, the last few days that we have, to make sure that all family members have completed the 2020 census, all friends, announced in church, with other educators, announce that, and if you would encourage and push for that. Our team here at the Commission of Indian Affairs has been pushing the 2020 census throughout this quarter and the last quarter, very solid, so that we can get as many of our folks counted as we can. As you know, a low count in North Carolina will result in a low funding stream for the next 10 years. So the impact is tremendous. And what we're being told across the board is that the rate of participation in the 2020 census is low this time. And so that's going to have an impact. We hope that when the data comes out, that we'll be able to see some higher numbers and those kind of things. I'm pleased to tell you that next year will mark the 50th year of the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs. And we're proceeding at this time to start making some plans for that. Hopefully by then, the COVID-19 pandemic would have calmed down and we can go back to our regular meetings and regular conferences and those kind of things. And so that we will be able to have a celebration in 2021 for our 50th anniversary of the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs. As you know, November is election time, so we've been pushing very hard to make sure that we get information out about the voting process, to encourage our folks to register to vote. And while I'm on that note, you see an item on the agenda that talks about registration statistics here in North Carolina. Now, this is an extremely powerful piece of information here. I have shared this information with our educators over the last couple of weeks. You might have seen this already. I've shared this with the Governor's Interstate Indian Council, which I'm a board member of, which is a national organization of state governors, state commissions, I'm sorry. And of course, what you'll see in here, and I don't mean to pick out any particular tribes or anything, but I'm going to show the impact. If you go down to Robertson County, for example, you'll see that there are about 26,000 American Indians who were registered to vote in Robertson County. Now, that is just so powerful, 26,180 to be exact. Now, that just speaks volumes rather, in terms of the political clout of American Indians in Robertson County. If we look at the total at the bottom of the chart, and you can look at your own counties as you scroll through the information. But the takeaway from here is at the bottom of this chart, you'll see the breakout for the party affiliations. And of course, you'll see the final total at the bottom of 54,622 American Indians in this state. When I shared this information with the Governor's Interstate Indian Council representatives who are my counterparts in various states, Nebraska and Nevada came right back with comments. They said, how did you all do this in North Carolina? How in the world are you able to get this kind of data? Well, it's because North Carolina's been fighting for years to make sure that American Indians are counted in our state, to make sure that we can get a portrait of how we are positioned in our state. Now, this is, of course, a nonpartisan type of thing. But Nevada came back yesterday in an email and told me that their state does not collect race-based data for election purposes. Nebraska is looking at this right now and trying to figure out if they can request, or if the state even collects the data. So we have other states now are taking initiative to go and see what the voting strength of American Indians are in our state. Now, this is important information from a lot of vantage points. We can use this information in terms of our discussions with people who are running for office. We can use this information for discussions over the General Assembly, with our governor, and many, many other ways. We can use this information when we have our discussions with our boards of education across the state, and in particular those counties where there's a substantial number of American Indians living in those counties. So we're citizens of our state, and we as citizens should be able to reap the benefits of funding for education programs in the realm of Indian education, our subject today. And so share this information with others in your community. Another thing we've dealt with this quarter in particular, and SACIE has dealt with this one previously, the mascot issue has risen once again. We have two areas of the state. I won't mention counties or I won't mention school systems because I don't want to get beat up too bad. But they have reached out to us and asked for assistance in terms of some discussions and advocacy as it relates to American Indian mascots. So last month and this month, there has been several meetings held in those school jurisdictions as it relates to American Indian mascots. American Indians are not mascots. And therefore, you know, the commission took a stand on that many, many years ago in terms of trying to get school systems in the state to get away from using American Indian mascots. When we set out on that mission, there were over 60 school systems in the state of North Carolina that had some type of American Indian mascot showcased as part of their curriculum, as part of their school engagement. Today, I'm pleased to tell you that there are less than 30 right now. And I'm so pleased to see that the State Board of Education and SACIE maintains information on your website about the impact of American Indian mascots. And I really am concerned about this issue because as a child, when I was in school and when we had to give up our Palawa Indian school and go to the public schools, I remember how it felt to be teased, for people to make war hoots and derogatory remarks about American Indians. And it just didn't sit well with me, and it has stayed with me in all these years. So for a young child to be put in a situation where they're mocked or made fun of, this is not something that should be tolerated in today's environment. And so thank you for what you've done in the past to keep that issue out front. And it looks like it's going to be out front with us again as we move into 2021. One or two final comments here I want to make about the high-speed internet. I know that you as teachers, and I know several Indian educators personally who've been challenged with the new process for teaching in our state since we had to move the students to home and teach by way of the internet, virtual classes, and those kind of things. But we have rural communities in this state that's really challenged because they do not have good high-speed internet, in some cases have no high-speed internet. And so you as teachers and our workforce of teachers out across the state have really been challenged with this. And I know that the Board of Education, and thank you, Dr. Olivia Oxendine, for your work at the state board level and your advocacy there to keep Indian education issues out front. That's very important. And thank you so much. You're a longstanding member of the State Board of Education, and we really appreciate you being at that level and holding that seat. So there are many avenues through which right now through COVID-19, through which this lack of internet, the need for internet, hotspots, and those kind of things, there's funding streams starting to flow, and we hope that this will continue. We hope that through the CARES Act and other appropriations that we will be able to get the high-speed internet to all communities in our state, and that would be a positive outcome from COVID-19. Two final things I want to mention about the COVID-19 and the pandemic. We have been working almost night and day these two last quarters in relation to what's going on here. And the reason for that hard work and that reason that we had to stay engaged is because the American Indian population in our state was not being addressed as far as the needs as it relates to COVID-19. We found out that there were very few, if any, efforts being undertaken in terms of getting testing pushed out to American Indian communities. Everyone had to go through their local health departments. Everyone had to go through their local county. There were virtually no discussions in April and May across the state in terms of what was going on with American Indian communities. When we investigated and looked at the testing hiring process in the state, we were pleased to find out there were 2 Lumbees who had been hired in Robertson County to work as testers in that arena, but we were disappointed that no other tribes were being considered in terms of the hiring of testers in those states. Contact tracing was equally as disappointing. Contact tracing right now, we still do not have a supervisor hired out of 250 employees that were hired through the contact tracing process. And that has not changed as of report time last week. However, we moved from 2 contact traces to now right at 20 contact traces. And that effort was led by our workforce program, our staff who work with DHHS and the contact tracer folks who refer American Indians to them, get their applications in, et cetera, et cetera. And the final point on contact tracing, we've got a new effort that you're going to hear about with the University of North Carolina, Pembroke, that involves the purchase of a vehicle, a mobile vehicle that will be equipped and designed with equipment on it and staff to go out to our tribal communities, set up for a period of time, usually a day at a time, to do testing, to administer testing, COVID-19 testing. I have suggested to the staff at the UNCP that we also expand that to a one-stop type of vehicle, so that when it parks over at Halawassaponi or at Mahern, at Lumbee, in the various communities, Waccamaw, Siouan, Coary, Cherokee, wherever this van's going to be taken to, will serve as a one-stop place. So we're going to have our workforce development staff from our tribes. Each of our tribes have a workforce development program. If not, the program comes through the Indian Commission. So we're going to have staff dispatched out with this vehicle. We're going to have our housing staff dispatched so that when people come through to get tested, if they have employment needs or housing needs, as well as domestic violence needs, we'll have a table set up in the parking lot with that vehicle so that we will be able to share information and address needs at that time. That concludes, I believe, my report today, and I am just so pleased that to have this opportunity. So I don't know, Dr. Locklear, if anyone would have any questions, but just let me know, and I'll be right here on standby.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson, for those updates. Your dedication is appreciated indeed. I do have one follow-up, Mr. Richardson, as it relates to the mascot issue. And as a SACIE board, I guess we can expound on this. We're being asked the question, and I guess they're looking for an answer, if the 2002 directive from the State Board of Education and the state superintendent, which that directive was requiring that all districts report annually on their efforts to review their mascots and educate their constituencies about the effects of American Indian mascots. And so they're asking, is that still in effect? And they are also looking for a support letter from the SACIE board as it relates to the mascots. So I just wanted to expound on that.
Okay, I believe that's still in effect, and I would yield to Dr. Olivia Oxendine for further comments on that. I can tell you that the NC Commission of Indian Affairs has sent letters to both of the school systems. They were, within the past month, having hearings in their school system. When I say hearings, you know, when the county boards of education meet, they usually have a spot there for a comment period, and we did provide letters to those districts along with a copy of the resolution that we prepared many years ago in relation to mascots and the impact of mascots.
Yes, I'll be more than happy to comment on that. I'm on my phone and I have to change my brain on how to do
We can hear you, Dr. Oxendine.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Richardson, for that very thorough update. And yes, I'll be more than glad to comment on the mascot issue. The State Board of Education last month adopted an equity resolution, and an extension of the equity resolution is a strategic plan, actually some operational plan for the equity resolution, and it's either in the resolution or perhaps in the operational plan. There is mention of the mascot issue. So what I would absolutely, we will the State Board of Education will stand by that. I suppose it was a motion that was adopted by SACIE probably several years ago. I was not working closely with SACIE at the time. So if that was an action voted on by the council, then by all means, the State Board of Education will honor that annual reporting requirement. What I would also like to say at this time, Mr. Richardson, that this is the beauty of collaboration. Here's a perfect moment to talk about the beauty of collaboration. So I would say get with Dr. Silver and bring her up to speed on your interaction with those two school systems, because that will certainly help the state board in any activity that we align with the mascot issue. So that will be important, that we all understand the same thing, and well, state board knows that you've been in touch with a couple of our districts. So does anyone have questions?
This is Dorothy Yates. The National Congress of American Indians just published an Ending Indian Mascots initiative, and they have a national school mascot tracking database with the current numbers on those, and it reports that there were a total of 52 mascot changes in the calendar year of 2020. But it lists some more detailed information. If you would go to the website for the National Congress of American Indians, and it has this information published, and it was last updated September the 21st of 2020.
Thank you, Ms. Yates. Let me add another point, I'll tell you that there will probably be, when the mascot issue, when we begin exploring that and making districts aware of it, you're probably very much aware of this as well, there could be, I'm not saying there will be, but the possibility of community pushback to that idea will, the council and the State Board of Education will be prepared for that. And some of it will be tied to loyalty to the team, alumni of the school and their devotion to whatever sport they play. They may have been an outstanding football player, basketball player. So there is a kind of a natural affinity to this rah, rah, rah spirit around the mascot. So it won't be the first time the State Board of Education would have dealt with community concerns and community pushback, whether it's a mascot issue or other issues that come our way, but just to get you kind of prepared for any kind of dissension coming from communities. I remember this was maybe 10, 12 years ago when the mascot issue was high profile in the state, and you know, those of you, all of you are familiar with UNCP and our mascot. I'm very proud of our mascot. We have the Braves. We have it mascot, and we have it, it's our logo and one of our several logos. And the community, with Greater Pembroke community, took a vote on it. So this is where the community voice does become important. And there were a couple of, maybe at least one, maybe a couple of community meetings around the mascot issue. And the community supported keeping the mascot because it is tied to the culture of the school. I mean, it's part of our legacy. We're very proud of that. We're the Braves. The school was established in North Carolina statutes to provide an educational opportunity for Indian people. And so that there's an understandable reason, an affinity to want to keep that in place. So I just wanted to add that little bit of information to help us move forward.
Dr. Locklear, I'd like to make a comment too. Dr. Oxendine is very correct. When we set out probably more than 20 years ago, close to 30 years ago now, to address this mascot issue. There was a considerable pushback. And what we've always encouraged, people who are engaged in that discussion to, be diplomatic and to understand that, the schools are governed locally. While we can write a letter as an Indian Commission and, encourage things, we in no way can make those school systems change their mascots. So we have to go into this discussion with a realization that, there are, as Dr. Oxendine has mentioned, certain loyalties to these mascots. And although we don't appreciate it, then we may not have the votes locally or the push locally to make that change. What I think we do have on our side right now, as a population and as a people, even the Washington Redskins. Now, after years and years and years, and I don't mean to, tamper with someone's affiliation with their ball team, but, there's Indian tribes have a long-standing issue with that. And so, it looks like the timing might be right, and I think that might be why some of these issues are evolving out there right now. So thank you again, Dr. Oxendine, for your input on that.
Most certainly.
Thank you both for your insight.
This is Dorothy Yates. If I could make one more comment.
Sure.
For one of the instances that Mr. Richardson reported on, that we did send a letter to their Board of Education meeting, that change did come from the community. They have an equity group, and they had been looking at equity in their community, and this result came from that group recognizing the harm that mascots can cause Native youth and the structural racism. So that community group on equity was the group that brought up the issue to the Board of Education in that community. So I think our thinking on this is changing and evolving because of what's happening on our national scenes now with equity and racial equality. But that's where that change did stem from. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yates.
Dr. Locklear, I wanted to get a little sidebar comment in there for Dr. Oxendine, because I was very pleased in this issue, that mascot issue that evolved over near the Charlotte area. Dennis Lowry's daughter, Dennis Lowry's child, is one of the people who have come out in that discussion. And it's very pleasing to me to see that it's not only just our American Indians engaged in that conversation, it's a lot of non-Indians supporting that as well.
That's very good to hear. And it's also going to Ms. Yates' point about the issue emerging or evolving from bubbling up from the community is certainly the preferred way. So that's very encouraging to hear that. And I think where you do have spots around the around the state of North Carolina where equity is a growing concern, we'll probably see that. It may not be as difficult to forge ahead with the mascot issue as that was several years ago. That's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Thank you all for your insights as it relates to the mascots. Moving along in our agenda, joining us again is no stranger to SACIE, our very own Dr. Connie Locklear, bringing forth the Title VI updates and information. Welcome, Dr. Connie.
Good morning. I'd like to begin by saying congratulations to you, Dr. Locklear, for being voted as chairwoman for SACIE, and congrats to all of our new members. I'm I am so happy that SACIE, and I always knew this, it's always in good hands. We have a lot of people that really care about our American Indian population, so thank you all. And I miss this. But anyway, let me share a couple pieces of information. One piece I like to share with you is that UNC, this has nothing to do with the updates for Title VI, but it's important information. UNC TV is going to present Gen Z Dealing with Change. And this is it's a webinar, and there are 3 students on this panelist. And one is from Robinson, one is from Wake, and one is from Yance. And these students are going to talk about how education has changed. They're going to have some talk about digital equity, and then the mental health component will be addressed too, as this whole pandemic is impacting our students. How it's going to impact, and that event is going to be Wednesday, September 30th, and it's open to the public. If you don't mind, Dr. Silver, I can send it to you, the flyer, and you can send it out to everyone if they're interested. But it will be Wednesday night, September 30th, from 7 to 8 p.m. And these 3 students are high school students. We're just happy to have the native voice on this webinar for our students. So that's one piece I like to share with you. The other piece of information as it relates to Title VI is many of you are aware, Title VI directors and coordinators, that this year is the first year in history that we were allowed to roll our funds over. Every year our funds had to be finalized by June 30th during that fiscal year, from July 1 to June 30th. But this year, because of the pandemic, they allowed us to roll our funds over. They also opened the door for our funds to be used to purchase devices and hotspots for our students if we need them. Once again, if you purchase those items, you have to ensure that those items are going to go to students that have an ED 506 form on file. But it did give us some flexibility. And with that being said, because they allowed our funds to roll over to September, we have to have them spent by June 30th of 2021. They also allow the APR to be rolled over, the annual performance report that is due every year. They rolled that over as well, which was good news for all of us. This year, NIEA will have their conference, National Indian Education Association, and it's October the 7th through the 9th. It is a virtual convention, so the convention will still be in place. And during that time, OIE, the Office of Indian Education, will be conducting several updates as it relates to our Title VI grants. And Wednesday, October the 7th, they will have a OIE update from 4:30 to 5:30, and that will be Eastern time. And then there's an OIE Title VI formula grant update Thursday, October the 8th, and that's 11:30 to 12:30 p.m., and that's also Eastern time. And then there's a technical assistance update for Title VI as well, and that will be Thursday, October the 8th from 2:30 to 3:30 Eastern time. And a Title VI, another technical assistant, this is the post-award management. That will be Friday, October the 9th from 12 to 1. And then those that applied for discretionary grants and have received those, there's a grant update, and that will be Friday, October the 9th from 1:15 to 2:15. There's also a meeting with the U.S. Department of Education for the Office of Special Education Programs, and that's Friday, October the 9th from 3 to 4. So they are really taking a big role during this NIEA conference to ensure that they're providing updates. And I'm going to wait a minute. You guys hear the train.
Hey, this is Will Paul. Quick question for you, Dr. Locklear. Is it any way possible we can get an email with this agenda with these timelines and everything? So if we can look at joining in on these and watching, that way we can have that.
I can forward that to you, and if you're going, I can forward it to Dr. Silver, and she can give that out. Is that okay, Dr. Silver?
Yes, ma'am. If you get those to us, we'll send it out to everyone.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Because it seems like these are some really, some really good topics and conversations that we need to be aware of. So I would definitely like to, if possible, sit in on some of those.
But you have to attend the conference. You have to be part of the conference to attend those. So I can send that link out. And the conference is, I think, general registration ends to the 27th, and late registration begins on the 28th of September. So if you'll go to the NIEA website, you can see that as well, all that information.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, and I'll get that information out to you. Most of you probably already know that we have a new Office of Indian Education Director, and this is Julian Rivera Jr. He is from Oklahoma. He was the Executive Director of Indian Education, and he's also a former NIEA board member, and we actually were voted on the board at the same time. So I had the opportunity to get to know Julian. He's a great individual, and I know that he's going to do great work at OIE. So we're happy about that. Some pieces that I would like to share with you that when talking to OIE this summer as it relates to programming and how to ensure that we are using the funds appropriately during this pandemic, because that was a little bit of it was a little worrying for me, and I'm sure it was for a lot of people, is, as Mr. Richardson said, and so many more, and we're all experiencing this now with this virtual format, we are still providing programming for our students. I would like to share a little bit about what we're doing in our county here. Our YDS are working closely with the social workers to follow up with students who are not logging on. We have a lot of students that are not logging on to their virtual classrooms. And so they're following up with teachers to find out which students are not logging on, making phone calls, and then using that home visit as a last resort. Because of COVID, we're trying to be very strategic in that piece and not going to homes unless we have to. But we are following up with some of our students. And as Mr. Richardson mentioned, we have situations where students just don't have access to broadband. So even if we get them a hotspot or give them a hotspot, it's going to be very difficult for them to even log on. So we are following up with them as much as possible. We're also making sure if they don't have access to broadband, that we get a packet to them and providing as much support as possible. We are also following up with OIE sent out a virtual 8506 form this year. But one thing that, even though it's virtual and you send it home, there is a requirement on that form, and that is that you have to have that parent's signature. So the parent can print it, sign it, send it back to you, or if not, mail it back to you. We're having to mail some of ours home to our students to our parents, because we're just in certain situations that they just don't have access to broadband to get them to them virtually. So that's a piece that's very important. The other thing that they mentioned this year is that the parent committee meetings, we are required to have those meetings. So we've already had 2 meetings virtually, and that has worked out really well, making our parents aware of what's going on, what activities we have planned. We're also having our virtual academies. So this, starting Tuesday of next week, we are going to provide drum and dance, we're going to provide jewelry making, and we're going to provide art and pottery. So what we did is we purchased these items for the students they're going to make these items during this virtual platform, and we put them in bags. The parents will come Tuesday and pick up the items for the students. The teachers will be teaching online, and we'll be monitoring that. And then we'll have this will be from Tuesday till October 29th. Yes, October 29th will be our last day. And we're providing those activities for them. We're trying to think outside of the box, and it's been tough for all of us. How can we still provide programming for our students and make sure that we're using these funds correctly and provide that social emotional well-being? So what we're doing is we have developed Google Classrooms, and our teachers, our YDS and our staff, we're connecting with our students that way also. Many of you that are in education are realizing, and all of us, I think we're witness to this, that social emotional component is so vital for our kids. We are people, we are relationship people, and not having that connection has been very difficult for them. So setting up times when our students can come on and we can talk to them and reaching out to them and giving them some hope. And not only that, but to our parents. We're calling parents. Had a parent call me the other day and she's like, I just don't know what to do. I have 5 children. I have to work. I'm a single mom. I don't know how I'm gonna get this done. So we're providing that information and then just making the district aware of these areas that they may not be aware of, where students don't have the access they need, and then sharing that information so we can work together as a district to provide some type of resources for these students. I also created a video, and in that video, I talked about the components of our grant, what our grant entailed, why the ED 506 form was so vital for our grant, and then I took a picture of every youth development specialist, everybody that worked in our office, because and I posted that to our Indian Education Facebook page, and I also posted it to my Facebook page, because I wanted our parents to see this person. This person is here for you. This person is here for your children. So put a name to a face. If you need us, this is the person on your child's campus for them to reach out to. If you can't get to them, then here's my number. You reach out to me. I want to do everything in my power to help our children be successful. I'm afraid, and I'll be honest with you, in the past, we have had holes or cracks that we were afraid that our children were going to fall through the cracks. Due to this pandemic and the lack of broadband in certain areas for our children, I'm afraid that they're not cracks anymore. I'm afraid we're going to have holes. And so I'm doing everything on my end to reach out to our children. As I said, that social emotional piece, just letting them know that somebody's there for them. Here we are to help you. What can we do? What can I help you with? Making that connection with the kids, having somebody to talk to, still having our ASA meeting, our American Indian Student Association clubs, still having those clubs in place, still providing some after-school activities for kids. Right now we have over 100 students that have signed up for the 3 workshops that we're providing. We told the students initially that we were going to provide them a device, but when I ordered the devices, they have been on back order, so I won't receive those devices until November. So I had to update my information and inform the parents that they had to have their own device and their own Wi-Fi or hotspot. And so with that, we have over 100 students that have signed up for these 3 classes. We usually offer 6, but we wanted to see how these 3 would work. And then next year, if we're out of this pandemic, which I hope so, I hope that sometime soon, I keep praying for that will change, that we could still provide this programming in our office for those students that are close by. But for those parents that don't want to drive, we could still have that virtual piece. So this is causing us to think outside of the box, but it's giving us an opportunity to provide services in a different way, and we are embracing that and hoping that it works. I also created a PowerPoint and sent that out, Mr. Gregg, for census, encouraging everybody to make sure that you're completing the census and why it's important and why we need our people to complete that census. And I think sometimes people are just unaware, and I think we're going to have to get that word out there in a different format than what we've been doing in the past. So that kind of sums up everything that I have as it relates to the updates for OIE. I would encourage all of our Indian Ed directors and coordinators to register for the NIEA conference because of all of these workshops that OIE is providing during this time. And once again, I want to thank all of you for being part of SACIE. It was one of my great pleasures to serve and to serve as chairwoman of this great organization. And Mr. Greg Richardson is correct, and Dr. Oxnine and so many more in saying that we are really ahead of the game in Indian country with what we're doing with SACIE and how we're providing these reports and this data to support our Indian communities. So thank you, Chairwoman Locklear and everyone, and I'll get that information to Dr. Silver. If you have any questions at this time, I'll take those questions.
Dr. Connie, this is Rodney Jackson. Can I say something?
Yes, go ahead.
I like to piggyback a little bit on what Connie said. We in Cumberland County, we were actually missing over 5,000 students when school first started. So we, as a school district, had to get out and find those kids. Indian Ed office in Cumberland County, just for example, at Cape Fear High School, we were missing 39 American Indian students. That's a lot, especially with the dropout rate so high for American Indian students. So our office basically did what Connie said that they were doing. We got out, we met with the school social workers, the data managers, and we busted our butt to find these students. A lot of them were having problems with the hotspots, unable to connect. But we also found out that a lot of students are struggling emotionally right now with not being at school, with some other issues. We found at least 2 students, and I won't go in great detail what they were struggling with at home, but there were some really bad situations going on at those homes that we had to get DSS involved. So when you reach out to these students to try to find out where they are and if everything's going on with them, remember that there are some personal issues going on that they just might want to talk to you about. Be there for them. Thank you.
Yes, Rodney, you're exactly right. We ran into that same thing, and I would like to add something to that. You know, when talking with our staff, we need to be careful about how we approach these children and their parents. We are so sometimes we're just not aware of really what's going on, as Rodney said, and we have had some of those same issues here a lot. Our student population, when I began as Indian Ed Director, was over 24,000. We are down to 21,000. And our Indian population is dwindling down as well. So we are really reaching out, trying to connect with these parents, connect with the students, get them back in, be a support for them, because they are going through a lot. That going back, that social emotional learning, they're dealing with a lot right now. This has been very difficult. And let's think about it. Let's think about what they've dealt with. And just say a fourth grader. That child has been through 2 hurricanes and now this pandemic. Just imagine how much impact that has had on their learning. That's a lot. That's a lot. So when you think about that, I mean, they have been exposed to a lot. So thank you, Rodney. And anyone else?
Thank you, Dr. Locklear, for your continued advocacy for title seats in our North Carolina districts. You're certainly appreciating. Moving forward in the agenda, we have a break. We can possibly shorten the break to 5 minutes, or we can skip the break and continue moving forward. Does anyone have any input on that? We need a 5-minute break, or are we okay to continue?
I say continue.
I agree.
Okay, we can continue with our agenda. So next we have updates on the SACIE module, culturally relevant teaching. If you would open that for me, Dr. Briggs, so I don't feel like I'm just reading to everyone. I'm not going to read all of these. So a team of us were charged with completing recommendations for our SACIE module, and we actually surveyed some students, received some data which was presented at our last SACIE meeting. So in the goal here, you see suggested revisions for each module. So just looking at the very first module, and we'll go through each module and then kind of discuss whether all the revisions are okay. So the first thing in the first module is to kind of update that report to the SACIE 2020. Right now, it's a very dated SACIE report that's referenced. The second thing, there's a new link for the cultural identity and teaching that's listed in that module. And then I also added some supplemental resources here. There one from DPI, and then suggested adding a SACIE report link, which links to DPI. DPI actually has those SACIE links reported, so just including that there. And then there's also a virtual presentation on the power of culturally responsive teaching. One parts of feedback that we got was some updated information, such as like panels. I reached out to Dr. Leslie Locklear. I know she does a lot with youth. I would have liked to include something with our youth speaking. That's always important. But we did have this virtual presentation of the power of culturally responsive teaching. I was a part of that group. It was held at UNCP through our Teaching and Learning Center. And then the fourth thing was to update the reference. To our new members and to our SACIE members, if you have not completed the culturally relevant teaching modules and you have access to Power School, you can certainly complete those modules and you'll earn 1 CEU for completing those modules. And it also gives you some insights in case you want to bring up anything as it relates to our modules throughout our SACIE meetings. The second thing is, the second module is Indians of North Carolina, and it references our 8 recognized tribes. One update was that Cherokee website was no longer found, so I updated that link. And then our second one was to add a further reading, which was the American Indians in Children's Literature website. One of the biggest suggestions that we got for Module 2 was possibly including non-recognized tribes, such as the Tuscarora. We would need to talk more about that. I did not include that as a revision at this time. All right, moving forward to Module 3. Module 3, the revisions here are just to update these links. Many of these links were outdated, so we have the Thanksgiving section link, which is new, our Mascots section, which is new, and then a statement from the Society of Indian Psychologists of the Americas. And I think it's really important for that site to be updated because of our social and emotional learning that Dr. Locklear just referenced. So those are the revisions for Module 3. Moving to Module 4. Module 4 was pretty intense. It has lots of instruction and resources and materials for our North Carolina teachers to help them with teaching our American Indian children and offering culturally responsive teaching and learning. And so many of these links were outdated again, and so I have just redirected them to updated new links. I did add some stuff to the fourth part of that module, our focus on contemporary American Indians. Our very own Lumbee, Brittany Hunt, completed a TED Talk in which she talked about her identity. So I did want to recommend adding that to that module, her TED Talk. And then the rest of them are just new links. And then our back matter, we certainly thank all of those for the content here. It's very good. A lot of our feedback was very good, and I just did a revision to add my name as I've worked hours to try to update this. And the last thing that I wanted to suggest adding was a survey. at the end of our module. So, so that we could actually construct some settings that will be required before they actually present or save or print their certificate, that they would have to take this survey. And this would give us ongoing data. I know Dr. Oxenine spoke about that the last time, that we needed some ongoing data from these modules, and I certainly agree. And I think that would be helpful for us to continually analyze and inform our updates and changes in the future. And that module could certainly be password protected before. Okay, any questions? I see Ms. Angela said that the web link for the policy components need to be updated also. Okay, okay.
And while everybody's processing, Dr. Locklear, I'll just give a little context for our new folks. So this is the culture responsive module, which previous SACIE members created, and it is done through PowerSchool. What's a new development is previously it was completely out of our control. There was somebody beyond the unit in which I worked who controlled it, and it was difficult to make updates. It was quite a process to do that. Well, now Dr. Briggs, who works with me, has gained access to that, so she's able to update. So once we get updates from SACIE via Dr. Locklear, who happens to be chairing this subcommittee, we can make those more easily now, because the issue is that the module took quite a time to update. And as you all know, when you get resources like websites, even research, things evolve and change, and so things get dated. And so that's the issue we were constantly concerned about. So now we're able to make those updates more easily. Some people do have some suggested changes. Dr. Locklear, I'll throw it back to you as to how you would like to do that. I don't know if you want to share this document and then people can make suggestions of additional comments. And so we just, in terms of the DPI end, we would just need communication from SACIE via Dr. Locklear when you're ready to make changes, and then we can certainly do that.
Okay, we could just go ahead and add these two suggestions and go ahead and make those changes. I really think those modules are very important right now, since we're doing this remote teaching and learning, and maybe some of our teachers, if we begin to push these modules out, maybe some of the teachers in North Carolina would actually consider completing this module to assist them with culturally responsive teaching, even remotely.
This is Dorothy Yates.
Yes, Ms. Yates.
I wonder if we would be able to add to this the 25th anniversary video that the Museum of History is recording from our different Indian communities. And this video will be prepared and ready to be shown at the American Indian Celebration, which will be held virtually. So once it becomes available, to add that as a resource to this module. Now, of course, I haven't seen the final results, but I know our next SACIE meeting is not until January. So if we could have Dr. Locklear look at some of the information that comes with that video or with the virtual celebration itself, where they will have different sessions taped and put on the website during those 2 days of celebration. So I would like to see some of that included if it does come out to be formatted and to fit into this. Well, that would be some very good updated information. Plus, I've asked for Dr. Silver to share with the State Advisory Council members the flyer for this virtual celebration. And on that flyer, it has a website that you can go to and teachers can reserve spots to on that Friday for Education Day, where students will not be coming to the museum, but the teacher can go online and register her classroom so that they can do that virtual tour on that Friday of the classroom day. And then after the event, some of the videos will be available from the Saturday event. So we need to get that information out to our communities and our Title VI Indian education directors and include that for our children's education on our North Carolina Indians. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yates. So it looks like the original Cherokee website was correct, so I'm just going to take that off of this revision here. They said that it was down because of cyber tech from December, so we'll leave that. I'll take that revision off. Thank you, Ms. Yates, for that information.
Dr. Locklear, this is Greg Richardson.
Yes, sir.
If I may, I'd like to make a comment on one of the aspects of the modules. I don't remember which one it was, but I would highly recommend that you stay with recognized, either state or federally recognized tribes when you include information in your modules. Then if you start adding state non-recognized tribes in that information, it becomes very subjective and very open to a lot of scrutiny. Then the question is, where do you draw the line? There are groups in Robertson County, in Holloway communities, Lumbee communities, Saponi communities all over the state that have no status as far as being state or federally recognized, which means that they do not come in under any statutory provisions. These are groups, and so there are some that are very controversial because of that. So I would highly recommend that you have a deep discussion and have deep consideration before you go that route.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. And at this time, no revisions were actually going to be completed to that module. Does anyone else have any feedback as it relates to these revisions? So overall, our feedback was very good. A lot of the feedback was just the links were not working, and so those have been included so that they're working. Thank you, Mr. Richardson. So we will not be including any non-recognized tribes when updating our SACIE modules. Dr. Silver, I'm not sure how long is the process if we kind of get these modules updated or we approve these revisions at this point. How long does it take versus waiting to January and potentially including some of the information that Ms. Yates was referencing?
I'm going to ask Dr. Briggs to speak to that because she'll be handling that portion, but I believe it wouldn't be a problem to do updates now and then later as well, but I'll let Dr. Briggs take it.
Thank you.
Hey, good morning, everyone. No, yeah, however you guys would like to do that, because it really is as simple as going in to the platform itself, and it's like copy pasting the updates, and so it doesn't take long to do that.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So we could possibly go ahead and complete these updates that are here and then move forward with any additional ones after the conference that Ms. Yates was referring to.
Do we need a motion to this effect? If so, I make a motion that we go ahead and make these revisions for the modules at this time and keep it updated with other materials that maybe come forward and be important to these modules.
Angela Richardson, second the motion.
Okay, motion's been made by Ms. Dorothy and seconded by Angela to make the recommended changes that Dr. Locklear is showing here to the SACIE module, making additional updates possibly in January. I'll do the roll call vote now. If you could unmute yourself and prep for that. Once you've voted, you can then mute yourself again. So I'm going to start with Cameo.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Melissa Lee.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Jackson.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Ria.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Angela? Oh, you made the motion. Mr. Frank?
Yes.
Thank you. Will Paul?
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Lowry?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Dorothy, you made the motion, and Dr. Tiffany?
Yes.
Thank you. Your motion's carried.
Thank you. And if you refresh that, I did make some edits to that shared document based on the comments of Mr. Richardson and Ms. Yates. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Richardson. Moving forward in our agenda, we have with us Dr. Priscilla Maynard. She's the co-director of Region 6 Comprehensive Service Center, and Dr. Maynard will be discussing the NCC pilot, a Native American project here in North Carolina. Welcome, Dr. Maynard. Is she with us?
I'm not sure if she's on yet or not.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, she's not on yet, so we can go ahead and do my part, the SACIE member orientation, if you like.
Okay, great. That's fine.
Perfect. Well, good morning again, everyone. Just for new members who may not be familiar with me, my name is Dr. Susan Silver. I work with the Department of Public Instruction. In addition to being SACIE liaison, as I shared earlier, I'm the director of our diagnostic services programs in the agency, which includes comprehensive needs assessments and targeted support monitoring visits. I currently have a 6-member team, of which Dr. Caleb Riggs is a part, and she's really my absolute partner in this work. Appreciate her so much. So one thing we determined that was important was to provide members with some context around SACIE. We're calling it new member orientation, but since we've never done it before, I really consider it to be information for everyone. So Kayla, if you could just go ahead and click on that link, which should take us to a PowerPoint. Perfect. And then can you share? Yep, perfect. Thank you. All right, go ahead and go to the next slide. And we're going to start here with a brief history of SACIE. One thing I think is so important in doing this work is kind of knowing what came before it so we understand the legacy behind this work. So I've asked Dr. Oxendine to partner with me here and just I told her an elevator speech of the history of SACIE. So Dr. Oxendine, if you're ready, I'll hand it over to you to give us that context and legacy of SACIE, please.
Thank you, Dr. Silver. And SACIE members noticed that Dr. Silver used the word elevator. So I'm going to...
Well, you can go up to the 24th floor. How about that? A long elevator ride.
I'll stop at the 7th floor in keeping it consistent with the State Board of Education floor. Oh my goodness. Yes, this would be, if I were given the time, and I'm not asking for the time actually, because you've got a very important agenda, it would probably take me to the top of the Empire State Building elevator to talk about the history of SACIE. SACIE was born in legislation going back to 1987 when the first general statute in North Carolina was passed, and that statute is 115C 210, and you can go to that. It's still in the archives. It's still on record, and read about the first general statute that recognized the importance of SACIE and its responsibilities to the State Board of Education, because SACIE is one of the several committees, advisory committees of the State Board of Education. The SACIE legislation was updated during 2015 session. That bill is Session Law 2015-295. It's Senate Bill 97, and from Session Law 295. And if we don't have a copy of that legislation today, I'm sure that Dr. Silver can make that available to you. The latest version general statute basically changed the membership composition of SACIE, and the total number of SACIE members is the same, that's 15. But the core change was in the balancing the representation between parents and educators. So that equation is now 5 educators and 5 parents. We still have our 2 legislators. And another change that came about as a result of the session law, Senate Bill 97, 2015, another change, an important change actually, adds a representative from our Department of Community Colleges. And we've always had a representative from higher education, from our 4-year institution. But we felt it was very necessary to have the voice of the community college on SACIE, so the latest legislation made that possible. The role of SACIE is a 5-part, 5 functions of responsibility of SACIE. I'm going to do kind of an abbreviated, quick overview of those functions. To review annually relevant data relative to American Indian students with an eye on achievement gaps and reducing the dropout rate. To advocate for meaningful programs to reduce and eliminate low achievement in our districts. To prepare an annual report that includes an action plan and make an annual presentation to the State Board of Education, which has happened for as long as SACIE has been established in general statute. To present and share an annual report with the Indian tribes and Indian organizations. That includes the North Carolina State Commission on Indian Affairs, and to also make a report, which happens annually, at the Indian Unity Conference. To work closely with the Department of Public Instruction, tribal leaders, and our Indian education coordinators to improve communication and coordination across programs that serve Indian students. To improve consultation with the State Board of Education, the Department of Public Instruction, and tribal communities. And the 5th responsibility of SACIE is to advise the State Board on any and other aspects of American Indian education when requested by the State Board of Education to do so. So those are your fundamental responsibilities. So the State Board of Education as a member and your liaison to the State Board of Education, so appreciative for the voice that you render and your expertise that is recognized in your communities and also recognized in your school districts. So that is SACIE, and you are part of an esteemed group. Thank you, Dr. Silver.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine, for sharing. And Dr. Briggs, if you would go, the next 2 links actually speak to what Dr. Oxendine was just sharing, so I'll briefly click on those. So quick update, the SACIE website has been updated and is live. We're still working through a few things, but the updated legislation is there. Much better than it was, but still working. So this talks about the composure of the council. If you'll, Dr. Briggs, at the bottom, you'll see the general statute, not that bottom, up a little, there you go. You'll see the general statute that Dr. Oxendine was just referring to. I'll give that a minute to pull up. So this outlines the membership that's outlined in the legislation. And what's most important about this is that SACIE is in legislation. It is a legislative body. And so as that comes some additional responsibility, because if you know anything about state government, and certainly about the history of American Indians, it's not easy to get them to recognize groups, certainly underrepresented groups. So some folks in our past fought very hard for this. So as we think about SACIE, it's part of why I'm so devoted to this work, being an American Indian myself, you know, making sure that we are represented in the best light always, because it's hard to get your group recognized in legislation, because that means that no matter how leadership changes within the agency, it's legislated. So we are a legislative body that has to meet. Okay, if you go back, Dr. Briggs. Functions of the council. Again, this is what Dr. Oxendine referenced, and she spoke through those, so I won't go through those again, but they are listed there on the website. You can go back, and then we'll go to the next slide, Dr. Briggs. So the SACIE mission and vision, you don't have to click on that, Dr. Briggs. They are referenced on the website. They are also on each agenda to help as a reminder of the work. Click on the ESSA link for me. We've already talked about those others. You'll see the mission and vision there. Scroll down, and this talks about ESSA, and what's important here is ESSA has become a major focus of discussion for SACIE, in part thanks to our previous chair, Dr. Connie Locklear, because of that last bullet you see there, which talks about the meaningful consultation and the collaboration piece. There's a lot of work right now around getting tribes and districts and the state education level to engage with one another more, and for there to be true consultation and collaboration, not just the appearance of it. So that has been a major focus. It was the focus of SACIE's summit back in January. Has continued to be part of that work. In fact, the work that Dr. Maynard is going to speak to in a few minutes in part addresses that. So ESSA has really helped insert the American Indian voice into the conversation about what's going on with education for American Indian students. And so part of SACIE's advocacy and work is to help that become realized. If you could go back, Dr. Briggs. We'll go to the next slide. So just additional expectations that aren't necessarily outlined in those functions. One is to attend quarterly meetings. There are 4 per year, so think of 1 each season. Once we are back to a normal space, face-to-face attendance is an important aspect of representation and advocacy. Every July, and I was just sharing this with Dr. Maynard yesterday, I get a call from someone over in the legislative office wanting to know if this council is still functioning because they want to cut it. So it's very important that people see representation here, because if there is a senior leader within the agency who stops by for a meeting and sees very limited attendance, that gets communicated back. So one thing we do to try and elevate this council is our meetings are typically held, or you all's meetings are typically held in the state boardroom, because it sends a message of the importance of this council. So once we are back to normal, we encourage you with as much as you are able to do face-to-face attendance. If you are teaching a regular classroom, we've not been able to do this before, but we have gotten the okay to pay for a sub. So we're trying to do everything possible to help you to be able to get here. Also, the dates are part of, we do a doodle poll to select the best dates. So you have the dates for the entire year. I encourage you to go ahead and calendar it and count on being there at those meetings. We certainly hope that at least by the spring we'll be back to a face-to-face format. Another expectation is to share information learned about state-level initiatives that impact American Indian students, as well as the annual SACIE report with American Indian tribes, organizations, and other stakeholders. One thing that we try to do is share, like you're going to hear in a minute, about the social and emotional learning support that's been happening in the agency. We try to share state-level initiatives that you can become more aware of, and then share with those for whom you advocate. Here's things that are happening. Here's resources you need to be aware of. Here's what's happening in the education community that you need to be aware of. And then tying back to ESSA, encourage robust tribal consultation or collaboration between school districts and American Indian tribes and organizations. We certainly want to encourage your professional learning as a member of SACIE, but also to carry that beyond and to share that with those others in your communities, in your tribal groups, and in your Indian organizations. Okay. SACIE does present its annual report to the North Carolina State Board of Education and at the United Tribes Unity Conference. In terms of logistics, once we start meeting face-to-face, for new members, you are paid for travel. Typically, we start meetings at 10, so Cameo is usually our only person who has to do overnight travel because she's so far, which we certainly cover that. Everyone else, you get paid travel, and we do a lunch here. Once we are back face-to-face, we'll have our program assistant come and meet with you to show you how the travel process works. The last thing, Kelly, can you go to the website and show them how to get to the reports? I didn't link that here, I'm sorry. So I see her putting up meetings and materials, so you see the dates that are already there. There's a link to the agenda for the SACIE Summit from last year if you wanted to get caught up on what happened there. And you can scroll on down, Kim. So this is the agenda that was there for this SACIE Summit, and all of the presentations that were done are linked within that if you wanted to take a look at that. And here's a link to the annual report that SACIE presented to the State Board in 2020. It was done virtually, and previous chair, Dr. Connie, made that presentation. And what that includes are the recommendations and the data from each report. There was one more slide there, Kelly. Can you go to that one? Oh, and Kelly just pointed out to me the links to the reports are also at the bottom of your agenda. So the last thing I want to share, and this will be something to process, and I will get with Dr. Locklear about how she'd like to handle this. So one thing we know is that there were not end of year assessments, no EOGs, no EOCs last year due to the pandemic. That is a big part of the SACIE report, is the analysis of that data and sharing of that data. Our accountability department reached out to us this week and shared that these are the data sources that will be available. So SAT, ACT for the graduating seniors of last year, AP information, cohort grad rates, and dropout rates are the data sources that will be available. And it's important to start thinking about this because while the report doesn't go to the board until the spring, we have to start working on it now once accountability can get that data to us. And you'll see their note there that they won't have that data available until November or December. But it does bring a question for the council of what does the council want to be in that report that's going to go before the board in the spring. So I'll just leave that thought to ponder, and I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Locklear, to open the floor for any questions.
All right, does anyone have any questions for Dr. Silver, Dr. Otzenine, or Dr. Briggs?
Dr. Locklear, Chair Lady Locklear, this is Olivia.
Hi, Olivia. Hi, Dr. Otzenine.
That's fine. I'm not going to make this. I'm going to make this a quick up the elevator. There's a point that I do want to make. The State Advisory Council has been very privileged to be supported by the Department of Public Instruction through a liaison, and several liaisons over the years, in fact. And Dr. Silver is in that role today, currently. And prior to Dr. Silver was Deborah Williams. Some of you may remember her. Prior to that, there was a Dr. Tipton, who I believe is still in the agency. Prior to that was Dr. Priscilla Maynor. Prior to Dr. Maynor was yours truly, Olivia Oxendine, when I worked in the agency many years ago. And the person who made this all possible, that started this journey, is Betty Mangum. Betty Mangum was the very first, kind of the inaugural liaison through the Department of Public Instruction, who actually kicked off the original legislation in terms of implementing it. So I would have been remiss not to draw the current council members' attention to that, Dr. Locklear. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. We certainly appreciate those that have paved the way for us to have a voice in American Indian education. And our work is important, and our voice is important as we proceed to advocate for high expectations in American Indian education. Thank you all for your hard work. Do anyone have any other questions for Dr. Silver, Dr. Otson, or Dr. Briggs?
Just before we move on, Dr. Locklear, I want to throw it back to Dr. Otson for just a minute to provide an update on social studies standards, if she's still with us.
Thank you so much. Very, very good. This is important, council members. The social studies standards that were on track to be approved for implementation this year, the State Board of Education 2 or 3 months ago put a hold on that. And so the social studies section, the consultants in the department, are back at the drawing board revising, making sure that critical components are there in terms of recognizing groups that haven't been, such as our indigenous populations, our state tribes, American Indian in general, that we are high profile in meaningful ways. In meaningful ways, I need to underscore, not just the name of the tribe or some factual information about the tribe, but very deep, substantive information is present in the new standards. So that's important that we, SACIE, this is where SACIE needs to, why the law exists for you to be who you are and to have a voice through Dr. Silver and others, through me and others, to make sure that what needs to be said about American Indians in North Carolina or across the nation is said properly and is reflected across the grade span, kindergarten through 12. This is a call to SACIE to step up to the mic and have a voice in the revision of those standards, the social studies standards. Very important. I want to just make this is my final point. I was, I think, reasonably vocal at the last State Board of Education meeting about the need for representation on the Equity Council task force that is a part of the equity resolution that was adopted by the State Board of Education last month. I will do everything within my being to make sure that American Indian representation is a part of that task force. It could be Dr. Silver, or it could be, I don't know, but the main point that I want to make is that the Equity Task Force must have the voice and the presence of an American Indian. Thank you, Chair Lady Locklear.
Thank you, Dr. Otson.
And Madam Chair, one last thing for me, you'll see a link to the SACIE roster. It should be up to date. It's up to date as far as the information we have. When you have an opportunity, click on it and make sure that your information is listed correctly. If you see anything that needs to be corrected, you can send that to myself or Dr. Briggs. It's also a way for you to be able to contact your fellow SACIE members. Thank you, Dr. Locklear.
Thank you. I'm so excited to see that SACIE website updated on the DPI website. I noticed earlier this week. I was like, yay, it's been updated. So thank you, guys.
And I'm sorry, I know I said that was my last thing. I'm like Dr. Oxendine. This is my last point. The only piece that continues to need to be updated are the resources. There are lots of resources listed, and it's the same issue as with the modules. So as we get some of the updates from Dr. Tiffany Locklear that she's sharing, we'll be able to mirror that on the website, because as she pointed out, some of them are broken links, some of them are dated. So we'll be updating that kind of in alignment with the modules as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, it looks like Dr. Maynard has joined us, so she's next on our agenda. She's the co-director of the Region 6 Comprehensive Serve Center, and she's going to discuss the North Carolina Sea Pilot, a Native American project. Welcome, Dr. Maynard.
Thank you, Dr. Locklear. It is my pleasure to be here. I see lots of familiar names in the participants list. I'm currently sharing my screen. I just want to make sure everyone can see that.
We can.
All right, perfect. Thank you. But as I said, I see lots of familiar names, and as Dr. Oxendine was sharing, I had some great mentors working as I transitioned to work with the council. I worked with the council from 1997 to 2011. And my mentors and the folks who just really supported and helped me learn were Dr. Oxendine and definitely Betty Mangum. And, you know, all of those names that Dr. Oxendine shared, I think each and every one of us we were just very passionate about this work. I can tell you that during my tenure working for the department and the State Board of Ed, the work with the council definitely was my passion. And so with that being said, I can tell you that I am coming to you today in two roles. One as co-director for the Region 6 Comprehensive Center at UNC Greensboro, which is outside of the Serve Center. We as well as currently serve as one of the 3 national capacity leads for the National Center's Native Education Collaborative, which is funded by the Department of Education in the Office of Native Education or Indian Education. I'm also founder and president of ImagineEd Partners. When I left the agency in 2011, I started doing national consulting work, mainly supporting grantees for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and then working, obviously when, my passion, as I said, was working in Native education. So naturally, it was carved into being a part of ImagineEd Partners. So I've had the honor of working with tribes across the country and working with close to 20 different state education agencies since 2011. I told Dr. Oxendine, though, but my passion and bias to North Carolina, I also take with me. So I try to be a voice for North Carolina and the southeastern part of the country, currently supporting some work around with grantees in Oklahoma and New Mexico, and several tribes here in North Carolina, the Eastern Band of Cherokee, the Hallawasaponi and the Coharie, and then UNC Pembroke with their FAIL project, which is targeting professional development of emerging school leaders, Native school leaders. So that's a little bit about me, and I thank you for allowing me to share something that I think is just really exciting. So just a little bit of what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to give you some background and purpose for this Native Education Collaborative project, and talk a little bit about what that entails in terms of the activities and products and a self-reflection process. And then hopefully we can talk about some of the next steps, and I'll address any questions that you may have. So first of all, the Regional Center. The Regional Center really is a Technical Assistance Center funded by the Department of Ed, and it is a technical assistance center for state education agencies and working with regional education agencies as well as LEAs and schools, all around improving, student educational outcomes. There are 19 regional centers across the country, and that forms the collaborative network of regional centers as well as the national center. And one of the primary purposes around building the capacity is to help the state education agencies carry out their consolidated plan, which is essentially their ESSA plan. Some things too that are important issues is the rural populations, and just working with the state education agencies to improve their capacity to support districts and schools. As well as working with the National Center. Region 6 Center, we support North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And the National Center is sort of like a partner with the 19 regional centers where they really deliver universal services to all the states around some problems or high leverage issues or opportunities that are emerging trends, across the country. For the National Center, they received a supplemental grant from the Department of Education, Office of Indian Education, to really pilot a model that engages regional centers in helping to build capacity for state education agencies to collaborate and work more effectively with Native tribes in their states. And all of that is to really, as was mentioned earlier, is all around ESSA and improving the authentic engagement, meaningful authentic consultation and engagement of Native tribes in the state education's work, as well as the work at the local district level. So what I wanted to do is just kind of introduce you to this project and the pilot. North Carolina is one of the pilots, and I'm excited about that. And as a part of the National Center's work, I'm excited to be the capacity lead for the North Carolina pilot. So we'll share a little bit about the pilot process and the timelines and some of those expectations as well. As I mentioned, it was a grant that was awarded to the National Comprehensive Center, a one-year grant, and it was funded through, there's a typo there, through Title VI. And it addresses the unique needs of American Indian and Alaska Native students attending schools across the nation. The project team is Jenna Scott and Amy Bitterman, and they are with the National Center. And then we have the need sensing leads, which is Sam Redding, and he's out of the Academic Development Institute, as well as one of the founders around the Center for School Improvement and Innovation. So he's very well known, and we're very well known in North Carolina for the work that he has done with the department. And then Janet Gordon, who is out of the state of Washington as a researcher. Janet, as well as Mandy Smoker Broadus, who serves on the National Advisory Council for Native Education, and myself are serving as the national capacity leads for this national project. We have some other members from across the country that are helping as team members, and then Kaufman and Associates is out of the state of Washington. They're also our communications leads. So a very robust team, representative of folks from, tribes of every region across the country. And that's what makes this work so exciting. We do have some expert panel members, and this is where all of the work originally began, with the experts who had a lot of experience in Native education as as school leaders, as school administrators, national organization leaders, superintendents, BIE, lots of researchers. So it was a very diverse and dynamic group that who are serving as our expert panels. So what is this project all about? It's really focused on American Indian and Alaska Native youth and helping, one of our goals is to try and help develop resources that help state education agencies collaborate better with schools and tribal education agencies and tribes. So some of the activities, we started with expert interviews that, sort of building on the same model, similar to the process of the tribal consultations that the U.S. Department of Ed's various departments conduct across the country, including the Department of Education. But we sort of followed and modeled that process and brought in our experts and interviewed them with the key goal of trying to really identify and synthesize and identify what are some of the priority areas that bubble to the top. When we think about Native education and what is important for state education agencies who work with tribal governments, tribal representatives, and LEAs, Title VI programs, and so forth. So that's where the work began. And from that, we identified those priority areas and began doing extensive literature reviews. And this literature reviews have been completed by those names we all will recognize as Native scholars across the country. From that, we began to develop and curate an annotated catalog of resources from various centers, various states and state education agencies. We were really looking for what are some of the models out there across the country that we could elevate and showcase so that other state education agencies could look at and see, how other states are, what components other states have within their program. I will say that the State Advisory Council's annual report is a part of that annotated catalog of resources, and it's being promoted as a model for other states to look at in terms of how to disaggregate and aggregate and the data of student achievement and all of the other indicators for Native students. So we're excited about that. Lastly was a self-reflection process and guide, and that's the work that I've been mostly involved in developing that process. And that is where we're going to spend most of our time talking today, is about the SEA pilots that we're doing in collaboration with the regional center. So I'm wearing a dual hat. I'm a co-director of Region 6 that supports North Carolina. North Carolina is a pilot, but I'm also working through Imagine Ed with the National Center as one of the national capacity leads. So I'd like to say I was able to kind of influence the North Carolina being selected as one of our pilot states. So what we're going to spend some time, as I said, talking about that, and then we'll kind of conclude with what will happen after that is after this pilot, we will present and train all of the 19 regional centers across the network, so that we can ensure that all 50 states and territories are positioned and equipped to engage with states and helping states build their capacities to support Native students. And why that's important is because, typically when you look at national reports and you look at Native education, it's sort of concentrated in the states that, have significant numbers of Native students. When in reality, we have Native students in every state in the union. And a lot of those students are in urban, in urban areas. And so if you take Massachusetts, for example, in Boston, there is a significant number of Native students there that are living in urban areas. And just as there are challenges in reaching and educating Native students in urban, rural areas, there's the same, they're similar and, somewhat different needs for those students that are served in other areas. So I think that's one of the critical things is now where this process from this U.S. Department of Ed is really focusing on every state as opposed to those that serve significant numbers of students by population. And then promising practices and lessons learned, we're going to be sharing that, and there's going to be a national strategy in terms of that. So a little bit about the self-reflection process, as I said. We brought in an expert panel and asked them questions like what would have the largest and most positive impact on Native students. And number one, and I heard that Dr. Connie Locklear, this is her message, in her work and tenure with the State Advisory Council, and I'm sure as with NIEA currently, is the SEA and the tribal and the LEA collaboration. And for that to be truly meaningful, authentic consultation in terms of really coming forward with working together to improve the outcomes. So our major takeaways was from this process was what are the specific categories we should be collaborating around, and then secondly, how do we need to develop that process? What would it look like? Because when we found that when we asked that question with some of the SEAs, particularly those that did not have an office of Indian education or liaison for Indian education, they kind of just look at you like deer in the headlights. They don't know what you're talking about. So those categories of state support, the what are listed here: tribal consultation and sovereignty, obviously the culture and language, and having strong representation or quality teachers and leaders, but also representation of Native teachers and leaders. College and career readiness and access, and obviously some of the things around SEL, social emotional learning, and the physical and behavioral health, and then a promising, where are some of those promising programs and practices? So within that being said, basically the circles of reflection is a way of, or a process of engaging LEAs and tribal representatives in discussions about the state's support for education or educating Native students. And so it's really a framework for states and tribes to begin to build out and working on and having those meaningful conversations. And I'm not going to read all of those bullets, but, beginning with the end in mind, where is it that we want to land is we want actionable plans to improve Native education. And the council for a number of years has presented the annual reports to the state board that Dr. Oxendine shared earlier. And, they have recommendations. So how do we engage in those meaningful conversations at the state level with the tribes and with the, Title VI Indian education programs in the LEAs, and really come up with some actionable plans that will improve the Native outcomes of students in North Carolina. So there's a value proposition for North Carolina or any, all of the states. It obviously increases their capacity for this meaningful collaboration, but it also meets those ESSA requirements, that are actually outlined very specifically as it relates to Native education, and again, specifically the piece around consultation. It's really a reflective process for them to determine to what degree and to what level are we in North Carolina as a state education agency engaging with tribes in meaningful ways. It's also a way of establishing continuous reflection and learning improvement, but overall we want to really support and strengthen North Carolina's system of support to serve Native students and the schools. So what does this look like? It's actually 3 circles. The first circle will be, we've tagged it as Seeing from the Inside Out, is really bringing together SEA folks, meaning the state, the department's folks that are really critical to the implementation of ESSA, but also who are, under their purview of work, have some responsibilities to, around Native education. Then the second circle is a reflection of bringing in tribal representation as well as LEA representation, to using as a springboard the outcome and the information that comes out of that first circle of the SEA. Is bringing the tribes in to talk with the SEA, because we have the SEA's perspective, but we want to widen that circle to make sure that we fully expand and clarify, those SEA descriptions of their work. From the second circle would be sort of a gap analysis. Where are there opportunities for improvement? Where are the strengths and that could be leveraged? But ultimately, we would go into a third circle, which would be select members who participated in the second circle from the SEA, LEA, and the tribes, to map a plan out forward. So the end game is to have a 90-day path of future aspirations, but an action plan that will be supported by the regional center to really rally around a project or some type of identified outcome and priority that comes out of this process. So this is just a little bit of, just to kind of give you an idea of who is involved in this. The National Center obviously is supporting a lot of this work with resources. The Regional Center is going to be observing, so that when the handoff after the third circle, the handoff in supporting the SEA and building capacity in Native education is there. So, circle participants will be, very important. These are just some estimated time, commitments as it relates to each of the parties or groups that will be, involved. But what we did is we calculated this based on best practice in terms of what we felt would be sufficient time to carry out this. So I think this would be no more than this amount of time, but the context for each state will differ. And so, in some states it may not be a 4-hour session, or it may take, may not take as, as long, but this was just a guiding principle in terms of that. So the pilot, if you look at the column that has date, you can see that I'm probably, you can feel my stress and my anxiety around this. This work was actually launched prior to COVID, and so the pandemic has definitely impacted the schedule. This work was originally framed for January through September. And so we had to adjust, and the U.S. Department of Ed had adjusted so that we could try and finish this work by the end of December. I can tell you that there is so much support for this work and this pilot process from various offices of executive leadership within the department. Ruth Ryder, who oversees all of these centers across the country. She worked, OSEP. She worked in OSEP, which was the offices of special ed. There's several centers across the country that fall under her umbrella. So her goal is to have all of the departments across the department there at the national level to work together and work with centers to really take a systemic approach. So with that being said, we were pleased last month when we met with the U.S. Department of Ed and showed them where we were. So at this point with this work, that they're now talking about doing an additional funding cycle so that we can, repeat this process with additional states. But the timeline around this is where we are now, piloting the circles of reflection with the pilot states. And that's September through early November. These are some of the other states that are a part of the pilot. We have Idaho, and Idaho is kicking off their first circle with their state representatives next week. We're hoping that we can get North Carolina's scheduled within the next couple of weeks. And then Oklahoma and Washington will then follow. But all of that obviously depends on the availability of folks. But we are looking at starting the first circle in North Carolina within the next couple of weeks. Immediate next steps are basically capacity lead, meaning myself, to begin working with the SEA lead, and that's Dr. Silver, and also fortunately we have Dr. Oxendine as well, which is unique. We have North Carolina has representation from the top, right, with the state board being involved in this process. We have already begun the planning work and have had a couple of meetings and have some things scheduled for this upcoming week so that we can begin to prepare. The next thing would be really for preparing for circle, reflection, circle process 1. But we need to, next step would be beginning to identify the LEA and tribal representation that we would bring in to be participants of the second circle, and then establishing that calendar for the activities through November. And Dr. Silver, that really concludes the content. So I will turn it over to you and let you speak to the process, you and Dr. Oxendine, and then how you feel the identification of tribal representation. You may want to speak to that, and then I am open to responding to any questions of the group.
Okay, so I know that slide, so I'm gonna give folks some time to process. So just to kind of summarize what Priscilla's talked about. So this is a pilot we've been invited to. The agency is currently working with the group that she mentioned, which is SERVE. So the idea is that they would engage in these focus groups essentially to get feedback from the state agency first, then from tribal leaders, and then develop a problem. So what's something that everybody has an urgent need around, and create a project that then SERVE would help to carry out. So this is where the voice is tremendously important. The first circle that she was speaking of that we'll start with leadership within DPI. And the question is basically going to be this: how do your programs support American Indian students? And in my kind of thinking around what that will sound like, of course, I don't know what's in anybody's mind, but just based on what I see, I'm going to be fascinated to see the responses. And I think it's going to reveal a gap. And that is the job of this pilot, is to reveal where we have gaps at. And then as she shared, the circles keep going where we get to the tribal representation, where they share where they see gaps. And it's within those gaps that the problem will be identified. So then one of the next steps, and Priscilla, you can correct me if I'm wrong, and certainly Dr. Oxendine jump in, is to identify tribal representation and also SACIE representation. So any of you who've worked with focus groups know you want to get the right folks on this bus, the right people in the right seats who can express the needs and advocate for that, and who also have a good idea of what they feel like is going on. And you don't want it to be too big, because if you get too big, then you can't really get to the core issue. So being selective in that. Some recommendations I put forward in terms of SACIE have certainly been our SACIE chair. Also thinking about Ms. Dorothy, because she holds dual membership on both the commission and SACIE, certainly open to other suggestions of representation as we move to that point. And Dr. Maynard can certainly know how she wants us to move about that. So I'm going to throw either back to you, Priscilla, or Dr. Oxendine, if you want to weigh in with anything, and then we'll open up the floor for questions again, if that's okay, Madam Chair.
Yes, that's fine.
Madam Chair, this is Olivia. I do have a quick comment.
You may go ahead, Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you very much. The State Board, this is a very exciting project. It is, State Board will absolutely put its full force of support behind it, no doubt about that. Listening to Dr. Maynard's presentation and then the quick summary of all the key points by Dr. Silver caused me to think about one important aspect, and it's once those gaps are identified, when the groups begin from one circle to the next circle to the final circle, begin to see those emerging gaps. This is where facilitation, that's where the hard work will begin in my mind, is identifying the gaps and then coming up with solutions to fill the gap. So it's conceptually it's exciting, and I know practically it will be, realistically it will be more than exciting. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Those are my comments.
Yeah, and this is Priscilla. I was excited to, one of the reasons why we were interested as a team is a pilot, and as Dr. Oxendine said, pilots are it's really a learning process, so that we can refine this process before we kind of begin nationwide implementation through the 19 regional centers. But North Carolina was different, right? So when you look at those states, all of those states have offices of Indian education. North Carolina doesn't really, our configuration in terms of internal of the agency, differs. So we wanted to be able to learn, learn what that looks like, what that collaboration looks like, and those types of things. So it will be a messy process, I think, but I feel so much value will come out of this. There was a similar process, I think, maybe around 2000, between 2000 and 2003, that was done. But that was really, at that time, it was somewhat aligned to the State Board of Education strategic planning process, and what the product for the SACIE was the strategic pathways, I think is what it was called, which really aligned to the agency's work, and when various initiatives were being kicked off. And I see that Miss Dorothy is on the call. Miss Dorothy was an integral part of the standards revision process that kicked off during that period of time, which was interesting enough, Dr. Oxendine, was the social studies standards revisioning process. And so Miss Dorothy was one of the Native education teachers and representatives that was a part of that statewide process of gathering input. And we had multiple folks serving at different levels, with an outcome being being in 2003 the state board approving standards and curriculum that recognized that there were tribes in our state. So I agree with Dr. Oxendine and Dr. Silver. The engagement and the involvement, of State Advisory Council over the past, history of their existence has been very critical, and I feel it's even more critical. And this process can be leveraged to make sure everyone, within the department is, collaborating. There's that collaboration that's authentic in improving outcomes for Native students. Were there any questions for me as it relates to this? I know I went through it very quickly, but okay, Dr. Locklear and Dr. Silver, I'll just turn it back over to you. Thank you, everyone, for your attention and listening to this.
Yeah. And so I'll just say again, the next step is going to be the state education focus group meeting, which means people that work within the agency. That's hopefully happening within the next weeks. As you saw from Priscilla's timeline, it's very truncated. They're trying to get this done in a very short period of time. So once that happens, then there'll be more communication out about that next step of the focus group with the tribal members. And I'll be in contact with you via Priscilla. So Priscilla will communicate to me, and then I'll get those communications out to you. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Maynard, and thank you for your dedication to our American Indian students. You're certainly appreciated. Next on the agenda, we have Miss Angel Batts, Miss Beth Wright, and Miss Nixon to share with us some tidbits on social and emotional learning.
Madam Chair, I don't think they've joined yet.
Okay.
So we could spend a little time, if you wanted to, just showing them last year's report. Maybe you could show them the recommendations for the new members. I'm sorry, the new members, show the recommendations, and then we could do a little brainstorming around just initial true rough ideas around this year's report, since we know we won't have the data available. Is that a possibility, Madam Chair?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
And Dr. Briggs has brought the report up for you.
Okay, thank you. All right, as Dr. Silver discussed earlier, in the SACIE report prior to this upcoming one, we were actually analyzing the state assessments, and so we won't have that data this time. So we need to kind of make some decisions around that. One of the biggest things that we do as a SACIE board is revise these recommendations each year. So we'll need to take a look at these and possibly make any revisions for our 2021 report. So Dr. Oxendine, we always appreciate your support. So these recommendations are actually made to the State Board of Education. So Dr. Oxendine, we always appreciate your input as it relates to our recommendations for our SACIE report.
Thank you very much. Absolutely. The board always looks forward to this report and says to the board that the council's very cognizant of the legislative requirement. What I would like to put on the table as something to consider is that I think we could work this out. I think it would be helpful to come back to the board. It wouldn't need to be a full-blown presentation, but it could be a 15-minute update to the board on progress toward your recommendations. Maybe it will grow out of an action plan. I don't know about how you would see it rolling out, but I just think bottom line is this: the more SACIE stays before the State Board of Education, within reason, because our agendas are enormous, but within reason, that would be so good for SACIE, the visibility, and to update the board, to say to the Board of State Board of Education, we're serious about these recommendations and look what we're doing with them. So just give that some thought. Ponder that as a council and think about how that could roll out and how it would look. And Dr. Silver and I will be more than happy to think with you. Thank you, Chair Lady.
Thank you. Thank you for the input, Dr. Oxenine. So SACIE board, if we look at number 1 and number 2, usually these are pretty standard and remain in our recommendations. We could certainly make any revisions if you have any. One of the things that I see is we may have to change in that number 1 review and analyze the data from the annual SACIE report. Since that's going to be limited data, we might need to change that terminology there on number 1.
And Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
This is Susan Silver. As kind of your liaison between the board and the agency and you all, I would recommend, really taking a look at some new recommendations you want to come up with. Maybe some of the things that come out of this pilot that Dr. Thayer is leading around some of those gaps will lead you to some recommendations. Because of their timeline, you should have the information in time, because we start putting the report together now, like in the late fall, but the recommendations usually are finalized February, around that time. So you should have some time with some of that information that comes out. The other suggestion that I would make is look at what's coming out due to COVID. That certainly has revealed gaps in the American Indian community in terms of access. So that's certainly something to think about, crafting a bullet around that if you felt like that was a pressing issue. Also looking at any initiatives that have come out from the state board. There's a new literacy information that's available, social emotional learning, which we're getting ready to have a presentation on. I know Dr. Oxenine has strong feelings about the literacy piece, and I'd like for her to be on the agenda maybe some other time to share about that. And just kind of going from there, where the things already started, it's like we need to have a voice in here, we need to have representation, even down to Dr. Oxenine referenced earlier, the social studies standards. One thing that I think everyone realized was a bit problematic is that this group particularly wasn't maybe represented as well as we would have liked when they were revising those social studies standards. So that's certainly an area to think about. So maybe changing some of these quite a bit to reflect where you are now and to show, here's what we've been moving towards. Certainly, we can do some data collection around if progress has been made towards those, and maybe looking at some other recommendations that could help get progress towards these that weren't met. Not last year, because we do it every other year because it's quite an undertaking. Dr. Briggs helped organize an unofficial survey to districts that received Title VII funding only, to ask them where they were in terms of each of the recommendations. That is something that, in lieu of having that student performance data, that we could consider doing again if it was your desire. And that information could be shared with State Board. I wouldn't put it in a report because, again, it's not an official with all the psychometrics that need to be met type of survey, but there's certainly some information that could be shared with State Board, to Dr. Oxenine's earlier point. And I'll concede back to you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the input. Any input from our board?
Angela Richardson here. I had the opportunity to sit on as a tribal consultation for Johnston County, and one of the members there asked, with the data that we present from the different grade levels, if we could consider breaking that information down. I know it had been discussed before, and if within that report, I'm not sure if I'm in the right spot as asking about this, is I think she was getting around to, we combine our stuff for grade levels 3 through 8, and they were looking to see if we could break that information down, and so we could see across the state, are our children having more trouble in certain grade levels, and if so, what is the reason behind that?
Thank you for the input, Ms. Richardson. So this year we won't have that data. So we're going to have to look at some new options as it relates to our recommendations. But we could certainly consider that later on.
Okay, but what I was thinking of, looking at our past data and see if there were any trends, since we won't have any current data, we could maybe do a comparison with the previous data over the years. If we are looking at a place to, instead of having our reports that we have out in the booklet as usual, that way we wouldn't have the last year's data, but we would have the previous year's data, where we could break that grade level 3 through 8 and other grade levels, so that we could see if there's a trend at the different grade levels that are being tested, as a, something different to put in the booklet that we get published.
Thank you for that recommendation. Any other ideas or insights? So, Dr. Silver, we need these recommendations completed by...
So we'll start, if the data that will be available, if you all determine you want that included, and you may or may not. For example, they mentioned they could supply SAT and ACT data. Well, one thing we know that happened was that everybody wasn't able to test, but if you're looking at last year's, that may be fine. So, we'll have that data and can certainly do an analysis of it. In terms of the actual recommendations, usually if we get those by February or March, you'll have another meeting in January. We could devote some time to that. And I could also Dr. Briggs and I could create a Google Doc for brainstorming, which some of you have seen before, where people can just start jotting down ideas, and then, with Dr. Ox and I looking at it, and ourselves could kind of link to, here's some resources we think are within DPI. Because I think what Dr. Oxendine is getting at, and Dr. Oxendine, correct me if I'm wrong, and if you're still on the line, is what are some things that can be actionable? So what could you advocate to the state board to say, this falls within your purview, what can you do? And Dr. Oxendine might slap my hand and say, no, we actually can't do that. So one thing I'm thinking about is shifting to teacher certification, and are there any policies, is there any initiatives that the agency can put in place to help get more American Indian teachers in the classroom, and specifically in areas where our American Indian students are? We all know the power of seeing a professional role model that looks like you in front of you every day. So maybe it's a shift to thinking of things like that we know impact students as well. But the next step could be creating that sign-in sheet, that brainstorming sheet for everyone to start putting in some ideas.
Absolutely, sounds great. So a big portion of this SACIE report is our data. So we're going to have to certainly be creative and purposeful in what we decide that we recommend and include here.
This is Olivia again. I have broken my promise 25 times, and this is my final point.
It's fine. We always appreciate your voice. Please proceed.
I'm thinking of Dr. Silver made a point about increasing the number of American Indian teachers in our pipelines, and I'm thinking of the weighted. I don't want to take you in the weeds on this at all. but we just passed State Board of Education just passed a weighted model for tracking and taking a look at our schools of education, the quality of the preparation programs in terms of 3 or 4 criterion, and that leads us to that weighted model that I just spoke of. One criterion has to do with the ETP's persistence and commitment to diversity in terms of recruiting whatever diverse populated students to go into teacher education. So there could be the SACIE inroad into that component of the weighted model that the State Board of Education will be reviewing on an annual basis to make some policy decisions around our schools of education. Dr. Silver and I, and you, Dr. Lockley, we can take a closer look at that policy and begin thinking of, is there a way, is there a voice, or is there a way that SACIE can get into that? That's an idea that just popped in my head a few minutes ago when I heard Susan talk about diversity, American Indians in the classroom.
Thank you. Thank you for the input.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Silver, if you would create a working document, and then maybe the board could go in and offer some suggestions for these recommendations, that would be most helpful.
Yes, ma'am. We'll work on that.
Thank you.
Kind of separate and apart, one thing I would mention, separate from this while we're waiting, since we have some time, is Dr. Eichstein mentioned earlier an equity resolution that was passed last month by the state board. And the equity resolution speaks to a number of things. That's something that hopefully we can have someone to present at the next meeting on as well. And that may be some places of connection too. One thing that is in the equity resolution is that the agency have, I think they call it an equity officer or equity director. Always important that American Indians are represented in that and have a distinct voice within the equity work. And so that will be an important thing for this council to be aware of and to make sure there's advocacy in that. I think what Dr. Oxendine referenced earlier was an equity council that's being developed and having representation on it. So really thinking about that and getting that resolution to you all so you can take a look at that will be important. I'm going to see if I can find it now to project. So give me a minute with that. But just some discussion around that may be warranted in the future. And if anybody has, if anybody heard about that or heard the state board meeting and has comments on it now, I'm interested to hear the feedback.
The bottom line, Council, is that we have American Indian voice on that council. Because this is going to roll into the resolution in the operational phase, operational plan. That's where the discussion will evolve around an equity officer within the department. You got to be at the table.
Right, thank you.
Hello, this is Melissa Lee.
Hi, Miss Melissa. You can proceed.
Yes, I wanted to just say that since I'm the president of the Wake County Indian Education Parent Committee, we went and had the superintendent of Wake County recognize Indigenous Indian Day annually. And then also the other one was to recognize Native Americans History Month for November. And they're also going to implement materials about Native Americans. So we're not sure what the school board is putting in materials for that. And so I just wanted to run it by you, and if you guys know anything about that later on with the school board. So just to note that.
Thank you, Ms. Melissa. Did you find the document, Dr. Silver?
I've not been able to find a clean version of it.
Okay, no problem.
So we've got about 4 minutes till our presenters are to be on. So if you want to take a break, I can see you quickly.
Okay. All right, so we'll take
but be in mute.
You were breaking up, Dr. Silver, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying about main log and just mute and take a stretch break.
Okay, sure. Let's take a 2-3 minute break.
Hey there, Beth. This is Susan. We were running a little bit ahead, so we just took a quick little break, about 2 minutes. So everybody should be back in a moment. So, Madam Chair, your next speakers are here whenever you're ready to resume.
Thank you, Dr. Silver.
Hey, Kelly and Susan, this is Beth. I'm having some challenges for it sharing my screen. And I think, Kelly, you were saying you can do it with what I sent you.
Okay, I hear you. I think Dr. Briggs is working on it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely.
We can go ahead and convene. I hope everyone's back with us. We welcome Miss Angela Batts, Miss Beth Wright, and Miss Nixon And today they're going to complete a presentation on social and emotional learning. Thank you guys for joining SACIE.
Good
Thank you so
morning.
much.
Good morning. Good afternoon. I'm sorry. Hi, this is Angel Goodwine Batts, and I'm the interim director of the Integrated Academic and Behavior Systems Division. It is my pleasure to be with you all today, and my colleagues Ann Nixon and Beth Rice are going to be sharing some great information with you. Thank you all so much for allowing us to share this today.
So good afternoon. My name is Beth Rice, and it is certainly an honor to be with you today. And we are very grateful for this opportunity to share a North Carolina social emotional learning update with you. So I'm Beth Rice, and I've served on the Integrated Academic and Behavior Systems team at DPI. And I'm also a practices lead with that work. North Carolina participates in the Collaborating States Initiative with CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And as a part of the Collaborating States Initiative, we have a team that is focused on statewide social emotional learning. And I am the team lead for this work.
And good morning, I'm Ann Nixon. I'm also with the Integrated Academic and Behavior Systems team, and I serve as the Social Emotional Learning and Mental Wellness Consultant for the state. Thank you for allowing us to be here. I am going to probably, other than this, I'm going to turn my camera off just because I've had some really heavy issues with my internet this week, and it seems to help if my camera's off. All right, so we are going to start today. We realize we've got a short period of time, but we're going to start with what is called the 3 signature practices. This is a social emotional learning practice that can be used with adults. You can use it in meetings and trainings, also with students in classrooms. We are starting to use these 3 signature practices across the state in our adult meetings, and I'm encouraging teachers to use them in the classroom with their students. So the 3 signature practices, which are a welcoming inclusion activity, engaging pedagogy or practices, and then ending your sessions or your classes with an optimistic closure. These 3 signature practices help us to ground as adults and humans. They help to foster connection and a sense of community. When implemented well, they can create a foundation for safety, consistency, and even joy in our trainings and meetings for adults, and of course in the classroom for students. The 3 signature practices, again, are those welcoming inclusion activities, engaging pedagogy and practices, and optimistic closure. You're going to get to experience all 3 of those today during our session. So we're going to start with a welcoming activity. And what we're going to ask you to do in that welcoming activity is share kind of a snapshot or a brief description of your ordinary life right now that brings you joy. So when you think about kind of what that snapshot is or that brief description, we're going to ask that you share that in your chat window, and we're going to take about 2 minutes to share. And I'll give you, for example, one of the kind of snapshots, something in my ordinary life that brings me joy on a regular basis is kind of that quiet time and my cup of coffee first thing in the morning. So that's what I'll share if I can figure out how to use your chat window in WebEx. I'm used to Zoom, so I think I found it. Okay, great. So we'll ask everyone to kind of share your snapshot of what brings you joy in your ordinary life. I see gardening, doing my daily check on and watering of flowers, playing outside with kids and new puppy. Oh, that sounds like lots of joy. Rocking on my front porch in the evenings, yes. I'm enjoying a brilliant, beautiful, and unstoppable 3-year-old little girl who brings me much joy and much growth. Oh, exciting. First ever grandson. Music. Yeah, looks like we have a lot. Watching my boys play sports. I miss those days. Quality time with children and husband, the fall weather. Yes. Thank you. Gosh, thank you guys so much for sharing. As you can see, this is a great way to start off a meeting, training, classroom, just to make us all feel a little included and connected. We encourage you, if you haven't done this in the past, to make this a part of your meetings as well. We're going to share these again throughout the day. And now Beth is going to share a little information with you about our content.
So we're going to actually start this with, I want you to think just a moment about what you believe are the top 3 most important skills for our students to be college, career, and community ready. And you can jot those down, like on if you have a little sticky note or something sitting beside of you, or a piece of paper. And we're just going to pause for a moment. And if you're comfortable, we would love for you to share the top 3 skills in the chat window. And we're thinking about this in terms of all of our students being college, career, and community ready.
Bethany, do you want us to pop those in the chat now?
Yes, that would be wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you. And while you're typing in the chat window, I'm just going to affirm the State Board of Education definition of around equity, because all of our work with North Carolina social emotional learning is grounded in this definition. So we know that the State Board is committed to delivering equitable opportunities to every student in North Carolina, and we know that fair is not always equal, and equal is not always equitable. So therefore, when we're thinking about educational equity, that is the belief and practice of ensuring that every student is treated in a fair and just manner, providing the necessary allocation of resources for the success of every student, and eliminating discriminatory barriers to full participation and opportunities for every student. So some of those skills that, and we'll go ahead and look at the next slide. So some of those skills that you're adding to the chat window right now, and thank you so much for that. So we're thinking about things like understanding what I'm reading and being able to think critically. Certainly being able to communicate with others, being able to interact and utilize technology, and being able to manage my social needs, my emotional needs. We tend to hear a lot around relationship skills. And so as those continue to come in, I certainly welcome you to continue to add to what you believe those top 3 skills are for our students. I also wanted to share with us a definition for social emotional learning, which comes from CASEL. And so social emotional learning is the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. And so it looks like we have some more skills that have been shared around self-advocacy and problem solving, communication again, And so what we often find as we think about these skills that are really important for our students is that it also very nicely aligns with social emotional learning. Sometimes social emotional learning is referred to as the soft skills, but we all know in terms of being career, college, and community ready that they're really critical skills. So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. And this is going to share with them some connections between social emotional learning and equity. And so I'm going to read a quote to you, and this is from a tool that we use as a state to really evaluate our current implementation of social emotional learning. And it helps to kind of lay out this connection between social emotional learning and equity. So SEL can be a powerful lever for creating caring, just, inclusive, and healthy communities that support all individuals in reaching their fullest potential. Systemic implementation of SEL fosters and depends on an equitable learning environment where all students and all adults feel respected, valued, and affirmed in their individual interests, talents, social identities, cultural values, and backgrounds. While SEL alone will not solve long-standing and deep-seated inequities in the education system, it can help states, districts, and schools to promote understanding, examine biases, reflect on and address the impact of racism and other isms, build cross-cultural relationships, and cultivate adult and student practices that close opportunity gaps and create more inclusive school communities. In doing so, state education agencies can promote high-quality educational opportunities and outcomes for all students, irrespective of race, socioeconomic status, gender, sexual orientation, and other differences. This requires that SEL be implemented with an explicit goal of promoting educational equity. And so we want to be really clear about that. So it is important to share the concern from the field and policymakers about how to ensure that SEL is communicated and implemented with the intended asset-based frame that affirms the strengths, values, cultures, and living experiences of students from diverse backgrounds. Miscommunication or poor implementation may lead to a misperception of SEL as a way to fix the behaviors or attitudes of poor or Black or brown children, or as a means to offer even greater social and economic advantages to those in well-resourced schools and communities. This work is about systems change, which leads us to the MTSS framework.
And if we'll go to the next slide, we're going to briefly introduce you to the multi-tiered system of support, or otherwise MTSS framework, which is the framework that we utilize to build supports. North Carolina's multi-tiered system of support is a school improvement framework that includes academic, behavioral, and social-emotional instruction and support. Our state's model employs a systems approach using data-driven problem solving to maximize growth for all students. It's important to note that when we talk about MTSS in North Carolina, we're not just talking about the practices that we put into place for our students. Just as important are the systems of support for the adults to ensure that the practices can be effectively and efficiently executed. These adult supports can be found within all of these 6 critical components that you see on the screen. For example, when we think about building capacity of any initiative, such as a new curriculum, or even a new instructional strategy, such as the 3 signature practices that we're modeling for you today, we need to make sure we have interconnected teaming structures and process and procedures in place within our districts and schools to ensure that these initiatives can be supported and implemented with fidelity. The big picture of MTSS is really about systemically aligning your available resources, your time, your money, people, based on the needs of the schools as well as the communities in which those schools exist. We could spend all day talking about the systems work of MTSS, but today we want you to leave with the understanding that MTSS is a school improvement framework that encompasses all aspects of school, including social emotional learning, which should be embedded across all content areas and across all settings. When we do this, we aren't going in with the idea of fixing children. What we're doing is focusing on creating systems that result in those asset-based learning environments that Beth mentioned earlier that meet the diverse needs of students in environments in which all students can thrive. We'll take a look, next slide, we'll get a closer look on what you see here. Typically, when people think about multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS, their minds go straight to one of those 6 critical components, and that is the 3-tiered instruction intervention model. This component is the most visible to the outside. It's what we see as a result of all the systems work. The other components tend to have more of the behind-the-scenes work or the systems work, like the teaming structures and procedures and practices that I mentioned earlier. Because it's quicker and easier to comprehend, we're going to use the 3-tiered instruction intervention model today to briefly describe what social emotional learning supports look like within MTSS. Please note this is the end result of a lot of systems change. So the graphic in front of you, so if we look at with all the work within MTSS, including the work we've recently done with our COVID-19 support, we always start first with core support, which you'll see that blue bar at the bottom represents that. That represents the support we provide for all students. Within core support for social emotional learning and mental wellness, we look at our curriculum and instruction that both explicitly teach those social emotional skills and embed social emotional learning throughout the school building and school day. Both school-based and community-based mental health are also embedded into core support. The goal is a seamless system of support where common language is utilized to support all adults. Supplemental support for social emotional learning and mental wellness is provided through what we call a standard treatment protocol, where we define the intervention system through our instruction curriculum environment and data decision rules. As we define our intervention system, we go ahead and make plans for how we'll intensify the intervention when needed. Again, the intervention system, supplemental and intensive supports, includes both school-based interventions, which may be like mentoring, check-in, check-out, small social skill groups, and mental health through our school-based and community-based mental health systems. Next, kind of gives you a big picture there. Beth is going to share with you where we are with this work at the state level. Then I'm going to share some exciting work about a project that was just launched this week with some of our district and charter and regional schools. So Beth?
So in 2019, North Carolina joined the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, or CASEL's, Collaborating States Initiative. And we formed a cross-agency and cross-division team, which is called the North Carolina Social Emotional Learning Implementation Team. The purpose of this team is to define and scale up consistent social emotional learning systems and practices that promote both equity and mental wellness. Our team representation includes both the Department of Public Instruction and the Department of Health and Human Services. We currently have 9 divisions that are represented from the Department of Public Instruction and 2 from the Department of Health and Human Services. So you can see from the Department of Public Instruction, Career and Technical Education, Center for Safer Schools, Exceptional Children, Integrated Academic and Behavior Systems, North Carolina Virtual Public Schools, Office of Charter Schools, Office of Early Learning, Regional Support Team, and Standards Curriculum and Instruction. And then 2 from the Department of Health and Human Services, the Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities and Substance Abuse Services, and Community Mental Health, and the Division of Public Health. Guilford County Schools, which participates in CASEL's Collaborating Districts Initiative, has also joined this team. And we're really excited about that because they are doing some really innovative work around SEL and equity and actually helping to provide some national guidance around that work. So last year in 2019, we focused on cross-agency and cross-division collaboration. And you can see that on the left. We started our integrated work with a reflection on our current implementation of social-emotional learning, and we built an implementation plan to scale up statewide social-emotional learning. Our integrated work included resource mapping, state-level social-emotional learning, and school mental health resources that are currently available through both NCDPI and Department of Health and Human Services. And that collaboration was in conjunction with Project Aware. And we also shared a presentation and some updates with division directors across NCDPI. This year, you can look at the right side and see that we are focusing on leveraging key resources. So we have mapped existing standards with the CASEL core competencies. So those are some of the CASEL or some of the social emotional skills and competencies that we want to see across every classroom, across every environment, and this is for both students and also for our adults. And what we really focused on is with our mapping existing standards, we wanted to first show where SEL already exists in our current standards, and then to help to provide some additional teaching practices for staff. So when we started this SEL standards mapping work, we were especially encouraged when we had all 12 of these content areas that you can see on the right side to come to the table to support this work. And we're really excited because the SEL standards mapping work, it has been shared with the field. And this October, we are hosting a series of webinars on integrating SEL into the content areas. So also at the bottom, you'll notice some online courses and free resources. So to support adapting to COVID-19, we believe it's important to leverage existing resources, especially when folks are stressed and really having to think about how to support staff and students in a really difficult time. So we really tried to help to connect to some existing work that is already taking place in districts and charters. And to do this, we collaborated with the group focused on social emotional learning and supported the building of the COVID-19 SEL and crisis response practice guide. We leveraged some existing online courses, one called Core SEL Practices, which is for district and school teams, and also a course from the Friday Institute, which is called SEL for Educators. Both of those are completely free and, of course, would take the time of the adults to complete them. Also, we had free resources, including the CASEL's district and school online centers. And a big thing that has been really encouraging about all of this work, districts that and LEAs that have done this work are sharing that when they are implementing and focusing on social emotional learning, they're actually already seeing that it's helping staff to both adjust to COVID-19 and to reduce staff burnout. So next, we're going to go ahead and look at, so the next slide. So this summer, the North Carolina Social Emotional Learning Implementation Team updated our implementation plan, and with that, we continued to focus on these 4 focus areas: build foundational support and plan, strengthen adult SEL competencies and capacity, promote SEL for students, and use data for continuous improvement. These are the same 4 focus areas that are used by districts and schools as they support social emotional learning. Using the same 4 focus areas across the state, districts, and schools helps to support alignment and reduce duplication and fragmentation, helping to create more effective and efficient systems for us all. So at the bottom, you'll see a couple of selected key activities, and I'm just going to point out a couple of these. So this summer, we integrated equity throughout our statewide plan. We also launched the 3 signature practices, which we are now familiar with and experiencing. And we know that these 3 signature practices are important, again, for both adults and staff as we transition back to school, and of course, as school continues to evolve and shift, because it really can help to build a sense of community and foster safety. And we believe that it's really important for us at the state level to model this as we're interacting with districts and schools and staff before we would ever expect our classroom teachers to implement these practices. Finally, this fall, we leveraged both student and adult voice to build our state SEL vision, and we're really looking forward to being able to share that with you in the future. We also just launched the LEA virtual conference and community of practice, which is called the North Carolina Social and Emotional Learning and Equity Project. And so Ann is going to be telling us more about that. And then right before we move on, so a number of these activities help us to improve communication. One of those in particular will be launching a North Carolina social emotional learning website, and we're also working on a social emotional learning module for NCDPI staff. So now we're going to look further at the North Carolina SEL and Equity Project with Ann.
All right, and the next slide. All right, I know we are right down to the end of our time, so, but we can't skip this part. This is the most exciting part. We are so excited about the work with the North Carolina Social Emotional Learning and Equity Project that was just launched this week, Wednesday and Thursday of this week. We have teams from 33 school districts, 7 charters, and 2 regional schools from across the state who are participating in this project. The purpose of the project is for districts, charter schools, regional schools to share and collaborate as they adapt to COVID-19 and to build, implement, or refine their core social emotional learning supports within an MTSS while utilizing that equity lens. In this project, teams are going to participate in 2-hour virtual professional development in which they're going to process and reflect on the application of the learning objectives found in the core SEL practices course that Beth mentioned earlier and was designed by the Integrated Academic and Behavior Systems Division last fall. They're also going to be utilizing some additional equity resources. We're going to share a couple of those with you. So they'll be working on the content as teams and then coming together every other month to process that content and share with other teams from across the state. In addition to that teamwork, leaders of the work are going to participate in a 1-hour virtual community of practice in which they'll have additional opportunities to share with and learn from one another as they lead the work of integrating social emotional learning and equity within MTSS. Both opportunities will be offered every other month over the next 15 months. Our hope is at the end of that time, these districts and schools will have built and will be implementing equitable core SEL support systems within their districts and schools, and that they'll have statewide community of practice that will continue to exist and provide collaborative support as districts and schools expand and integrate SEL and equity throughout their MTSS framework. If we want to click to the next slide, these next 2 slides we're going to share just a couple of resources, just kind of give you a glimpse into some of the work that the districts will be doing. These are belief statements found in a great resource from Castle. We've shared all those resources on Beth, you've shared that, correct? That document?
I'll put it in the chat window right now.
Perfect. Okay, you've got with these resources in it, but they come from several. This particular resource really are intended to promote reflection on beliefs and actions that shape how districts will leverage social emotional learning to advance educational equity. As part of the work in the project, districts are going to be examining their own beliefs as well as those beliefs of those within their districts and schools. Just quickly, if we could just take a look at those 5 beliefs, and if you would just select one of the beliefs that you could just I know you probably could support all of them, but choose one that you could wholeheartedly support and type that respective number in the chat window. It'll take just a few seconds for that. I know we are right at our time. Yes, folks have chosen. You're looking at this. So again, you'll have access to the document that this comes from as well. And you'll find that worksheet in there on that particular document. And if we'll slide to the next page, we'll share another document with you. The next slide. This is another great resource that our participating districts and schools will be utilizing in the project. It's called Emerging Insights, SEL as a Lever for Equity and Excellence. This slide summarizes the 5 key insights found within the 30-page document. If you have a strong interest in this work, I encourage you to spend some time in the document. Again, you'll have a link to that. I wish we had more time to discuss and go through some of these, but I know we are at the end, and Beth is going to close us out with an optimistic closure.
Okay, final slide. So as we leave you today, we would like to just have you maybe type in the chat something that would be something personally motivating or a driving force for doing this important work of social emotional learning and equity. And if you can keep it short to like 3 to 5 words, we would love to see what you're thinking in terms of kind of motivational speech to one another as we go forward. So I might say something like moving together or full steam ahead. Or it might be something that's more personal, like my faith or this really connects with my purpose. So keep moving. You're doing better than you think. Wonderful. Thank you, Susan. And maybe as those ending kind of personal motivating or driving forces are coming in, if there are any questions, or if you would just like to email us any questions, we're happy to support you however you would like next. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for your time, Ms. Betts, Ms. Rice, and Ms. Neeson. Your information is certainly appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
You guys have a great Friday.
Thanks. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Last on our agenda for today are our action items. We've completed those though, right, Dr. Silver? Do we have any other action items?
No, just if you want to give us a summary of the action items we have going forward.
So we have our revisions to the SACIE model. And we're also going to send out a document for our recommendations for our SACIE report. And we definitely want you guys to provide your input for those recommendations or any ideas that you would have. That would be most helpful. And I think that's it. Did I miss anything, Dr. Silver?
I don't think so. So Kelly and I, either one of us or both of us, will be sending you the recommendations doc, the information from Dr. Connie that she said she would send, and also some additional SEL modules that have been created, so you can look for that from us. And I just want to say, great job considering it's a virtual meeting space. Those are always difficult to do for long meetings. Welcome to our new members, and I hope the next time we'll be able to be face to face. Thank you, Dr. Locklear, also for chairing our meeting so brilliantly. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. So can we get a motion to adjourn?
This is Will Paul. I'll make a motion.
I'll make a second. This is Frank Cooper.
Okay, so we have a motion to adjourn and a second. You guys have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Alright.